Before we start, the name is at the top of the screen. The scene opens in the vast emptiness of a starry void, a place that feels neither alive nor dead. A small, glowing figure drifts through the darkness, and nearby, another shape lies completely still, face down against nothing. A faint, exhausted murmur rises from the still figure, something about hunger, about being so terribly hungry. The floating presence reacts with confusion, clearly startled by what it's witnessing. Then, without warning, the still figure begins to fade, slipping away into the dark like a dying ember. The reaction is immediate and desperate. The floating presence surges forward, crying out for the figure to stop, to hold on, not to leave. The word "wait" tears through the void with the force of something final. Then, a gasp. A jolt. Back in the physical world, a girl snaps awake with a sharp, ragged breath, the word "wait" still echoing in the air. She's lying face down on a cold stone, groaning into the floor. Slowly, painfully, she opens her eyes. The ground beneath her is made of rough-hewn bricks. A thin blanket and flat pillow are nearby, doing little to soften the harshness of the space. She blinks. Looks around. The room is bare, stone walls, a few steps leading to a bolted door, a flat sleeping platform in the corner. She doesn't understand any of it. Where is she? What is this place? She tries to move. She can't. Her body refuses. She collapses back against the floor, breathing slowly. And then, through the fog of fatigue, she forces herself to think. Her name is Chihiro Sagami. The memory surfaces slowly. She was a Japanese woman in her mid-30s, single, ordinary, unremarkable by most accounts. She remembers the commute home from work. An accident. And then, nothing. She raises her hands. They are tiny. Chubby, round-fingered. The hands of a toddler, 2 years old, maybe 3 at most. The realization hits her. She was reborn. Actually, genuinely reborn into a brand new body. But then another layer of confusion sets in. What was she doing until now? The memories embedded in this small body are scattered and incomplete, hazy in a way, like pieces of a shattered mirror. She searches through them carefully, piecing together what she can. This is the corner of a castle. This body belongs to a princess. The 8th princess, to be precise, born to a king and queen of what appears to be a grand castle kingdom. The silhouette of 2 royal figures flickers through her mind. But despite that birthright, this child's life had been anything but privileged. She was raised not by her parents, but by a maid, before then getting abandoned. Brought her here to this cold stone room and left her behind. Her first memory was here. The body Chihiro now inhabits has been pushed to the edge of survival. Not just pushed to the edge, she seems to have died as well. Maybe that is why her consciousness has now surfaced. Maybe she had been sleeping inside this child's body all this time. She doesn't have the answer. But it doesn't matter right now. Because if this body dies, truly, finally dies, then Chihiro dies with it. And that is simply not acceptable. She drags herself across the stone floor, arms trembling, breath coming in ragged gasps, every inch of her aching. She needs water. Her eyes scan the room until she spots something, wooden barrels lined up against the far wall. Water barrels. Her body lurches toward them with a burst of desperate energy, and the moment she reaches one, she plunges her face in and drinks. Deeply. Desperately. Gulping mouthful after mouthful with great intensity. She comes up gasping, head bursting out of the water barrel with a loud splash, mouth wide open, gulping in air. For a moment she just hangs there, gripping the rim of the barrel, water streaming down her face. She can feel it seeping into her body, pulling her back from the edge. She had been in a truly terrible state. But the relief is short-lived. When she finally pulls herself upright and gets a proper look at herself in this new reality, the shock hits all over again. She is absolutely, undeniably a toddler. She mutters to herself that a person should at least make it to elementary school before having to worry about dying. And yet here she is, reborn into a fantasy world, in a child's body, completely on her own. In every story she's ever read, reincarnation came with something. A gift. An edge. Instead she got abandoned in a castle storeroom and nearly starved to death. Quite the opposite. As she rubs her tears, she notes how there is no time to feel sorry for herself. She needs to find food. She sniffs the air. Somewhere nearby, there's a kitchen. She can smell it, something warm, something cooked, drifting through the stone corridors. She crawls toward the source, peeks around a doorway, and freezes. She notes how it might be bad if someone were to see her. Several maids move through the space with practiced efficiency, carrying trays, tending to pots, going about their work without pause. Her mind kicks into gear immediately. She doesn't know who's responsible for what happened to her, and until she does, she can't trust anyone here. Especially not the maids. One of them might bring her to that room. So she decides to just sneak around and not get found. She tucks herself under a low shelf between two barrels, squirming into the gap quietly. She tells herself she just needs to wait for a gap, a moment when the kitchen empties enough for her to sneak something. But as she lies there, the smell of food drifting over her, her body starts to betray her. Her stomach is screaming. Her mouth is watering. Her eyes are drooping. She is exhausted and wonders why this has happened to her. The 8 princesses of all people. As sleep pulls her under, her thoughts begin to drift. Was it due to not being able to walk properly even after turning 2, was she always a little slower than the others? With 7 other healthy sisters ahead of her, was she not worth keeping around, so they threw her away? The thought of it, of people who would do that to a little child, knowingly, deliberately. Tears slip down her face as she lies there, half asleep, half furious. That girl must have been so frightened, so confused and alone, too young to understand. Hungry. Always hungry. She will never forgive the people who did this. And she absolutely refuses to die in this body. Whatever it takes, she is going to live. That conviction burns bright for a moment. When she comes back to herself, something is different. She's warmer. A blanket has been draped over her small body. And she's been moved up onto a low wooden bench rather than left on the cold floor. She blinks in confusion. A blanket? Someone found her. Someone covered her. A voice cuts through the quiet. Someone asking if she's finally awake. She looks up. Standing nearby is a young man in a chef's uniform, dark hair, a relaxed expression, watching her with an easy half-smile. She looks back at him with astonishment. He crouches down to her level. He asks if anyone ever told her she wasn't supposed to be wandering around inside the castle. He wonders aloud if maybe she's the child of one of the servants who lives within the castle walls, noting that she's gotten herself absolutely filthy. Chihiro stares at him. She says nothing. Her enormous eyes are fixed on his face. The chef looks at her for a moment. Then, without much ceremony, he sets something down in front of her. A bowl of thick, chunky soup. A round loaf of bread. Her eyes go wide. For one unguarded moment, every wall she built comes crashing down. Tears flood her eyes so fast she can't stop them, pouring down her cheeks. The chef blinks, caught off guard. He asks, a little flustered, what on earth is wrong? Her tiny hand shoots out and grabs the edge of the bowl. Her hands shake as she slides it over. She doesn't answer. She's too busy pulling the bowl up towards her mouth. Her lips touch the bowl as she pours all that goodness down the hatch. Taking it all in gulps. And then the taste actually hits her. It's good. It's genuinely, overwhelmingly good. She pulls back just enough to take a proper breath, then goes right back in, grabbing into the bread, chewing with her eyes closed. Taking in big gulps of those carbs and then placing her hand up towards her mouth. But there's a problem. Her body is still a toddler's body, and a malnourished one at that. The stomach she's working with was only just transitioning from infant food to proper meals when everything went wrong, and now she's asking it to handle hearty soup and dense bread. But she doesn't want to die. She absolutely does not want to die. So she will eat. Even if it hurts. Between hiccuping sobs that she can't quite suppress, she manages to squeeze out a few garbled, toddler-voiced words, that it's really, really good. The chef watches her, and a quiet smile crosses his face. He leans down toward her level and asks warmly if she likes it. Through enormous, still wet eyes, she manages a single earnest answer, that yes, it's yummy. She marvels internally at the fact that the food in this world is better than she ever could have expected. The chef straightens up, satisfied. He introduces himself properly, telling her his name is Adulis and that he works here as a kitchen apprentice. Then he turns the question back on her, asking what her name is. She tells him. Chihiro. He tries to repeat it and fumbles the pronunciation immediately, mangling it into something that sounds nothing like what she said. She corrects him. He tries again. Still wrong. She stares at him with the flat, long-suffering expression. She lets it go. It's fine, She decides internally. People from other worlds really do struggle with Japanese names. Adulis then explains what actually happened while she was unconscious. He had arrived first thing that morning, before any of the other kitchen staff, and when he came in he spotted a pair of tiny feet sticking out from under the shelf where she'd been hiding. He was startled, understandably. He then hands her a basket filled with bread slices and tells her to take it. He gives her a gentle pat on the head. Chihiro stares up at him from below, basket clutched to her chest, and a thought crosses her mind with complete sincerity. Is this man some kind of divine being? She squeezes that basket like it's treasure. Because right now, it is. And says thank you. Adulis turns but then finds her completely gone already. Singing that this is precious food. She waddles off down the stone hallway. The original girl, this body she's borrowed, apparently couldn't walk at all. But Chihiro finds that she can manage, more or less. She suspects it's because her adult consciousness already knows how walking works. Later she finds a spot to sit and take a break. She wonders what to do now. She doesn't want to go back to that abandoned room. And then, whoops. She tips sideways and tumbles right down onto the stone floor with a thump, rolling a bit before coming to a stop. She lies there for a moment, blinking at the ceiling. But here's the thing. When Chihiro looks up from where she's fallen, she realizes where she's landed, in the hollow space beneath the staircase. She later finds what she's looking for, a linen closet of some kind, shelves stacked with folded blankets. She hauls one down with considerable effort, reasoning to herself that everything in this castle technically belongs to the king, and if the king saw fit to abandon his own daughter and leave her to die, then the very least his castle can do is provide one blanket. She drags the blanket back to the staircase hollow, and promptly collapses face first onto the floor with the blanket half wrapped around her. She is completely, utterly spent. At the very least, the housing problem, she concludes with quiet satisfaction, has been solved. The morning after her first night in the understair hollow, Chihiro wakes up feeling genuinely different. She slept for nearly a full day and came out the other side with her stamina more or less restored. She marvels quietly at the resilience of a toddler's body and its ability to recover. She nibbles on bread from Adolis's basket, grateful for every bite, and then realizes something. She knows what to do and returns back to the kitchen. She makes her case with total sincerity. She will work, and in exchange she wants food. Just like that. Adulis blinks at her, clearly caught off guard by the sheer confidence. He questions what she means by that, as she starts to nod. He thinks it over, studying her. She speaks well for her age, carries herself with unusual composure, and looks to be maybe 4 or 5 at most. Her eyes seem to have a fire in them. Curious, he poses a simple test. Can she peel potatoes? He hands her a small knife and tells her to give it a try. To which she yells yes. Chihiro takes it with both hands and gets to work. She holds a potato near her knife and starts to peel. Internally, she reminds herself of something important. This body is young, but she is the one controlling it. She knows how movement works. She cannot live without support at this age, so it's pretty much hard mode. So she must at least do something to get her own food. Adulis watches from a distance, eyebrows rising. She's faster than expected. Remarkably capable for those tiny hands. He can't quite figure out if she helps out at home regularly, but either way, the results speak for themselves. He calls out her name, getting the pronunciation slightly wrong as usual, and delivers the verdict with a grin and a thumbs up. She's hired and they could use her help. Chihiro lights up completely with joy and yells yes. She throws herself into the work. Task after task, Adulis assigns her things and she tackles each one with cheerful eagerness. Adulis watches her with a quietly fond expression, privately thinking that there's something genuinely endearing about a small child running around this kitchen tirelessly. At the end of the day, he sets a warm meal in front of her and tells her to eat before heading out, and to take the extra food home with her for later. She thanks him with absolute sincerity, holds the basket to her chest, and walks away down the corridor while he watches her go, musing softly that it really isn't much food, but she always looks so radiantly happy about it. Meanwhile, things are shifting behind the scenes. The head chef of the kitchen, a massive, heavily bearded man with a big build, has noticed that Adulis has been finishing his prep work unusually fast lately. Adulis then says he'd like to speak with the man later, which catches the head chef off guard. A child? Asks the man. Adulis says that it's been 10 days and this child seems to have been neglected by her parents. She works so hard. Adulis wants to do something for this child but he does not know what. The head chef ponders for a moment before then saying he wants to meet her. Back in her understair hollow, Chihiro has been steadily building something that almost resembles a home. Thanks to a policy of enthusiastic borrowing from the castle, she's acquired a blanket, a cup, some plates, and various other small necessities. She notes internally that she may have seen this approach in an anime once. She chews her food with exaggerated thoroughness, reminding herself that her toddler's stomach still can't handle things carelessly or else her stomach won't digest. The weather is still manageable for now, but winter is eventually coming and she has no change of clothes. Also no way to wash her hair properly without risking getting sick. She just wants to shower and take a bath. There are still plenty of problems ahead. But for now, sitting here in her small corner of the castle, she feels as though she can live like this. The next morning she arrives at the kitchen cheerfully announcing that she's finished all the potato peeling. She then is stunned as she comes face to face with a wall of a man, the head chef himself, enormous, and bearded. The chef notes how this is the one to which Adulis says yes. He stares intently as Chihiro internally screams that this is a bear. Adulis introduces them. The head chef's name is Drago, and he is the person in charge of this entire kitchen operation. Our female lead bows and says it is nice to meet him, and mentions how Mr. Adulis has been helping her. He looks Chihiro over with calm, sharp eyes and asks how old she is. She tells him 2 or 3, probably. He glances at her work, the basket of cleanly peeled potatoes sitting nearby, and notes how no child of 2 or 3 should be able to use a knife like that. Then Drago asks the harder question. Her parents, where are they? The ghost of 2 royal silhouettes flickers through her mind, distant, cold, robed in the authority of people. She answers plainly. They're gone. Drago asks what she is doing here, to which she says she does not know. She says she was in the room for so long and hungry, before starting to tear up. He questions this room. Later she leads the 2 men to the abandoned room she escaped from. The hollow quiet of a place. Drago takes it in, questioning if she was left here. This is not forgivable. Did her parents want her to pass away? This is only a little girl. He says what he's thinking plainly, no parents, no food, locked away in this. The fact that she's still alive at all is remarkable. He tells her she did well to survive. And then he pulls her face gently into his huge hands, tilts it upward. And with a big smile, says that if she has no parents, then he'll be her father. Starting today, she's his child. Chihiro stares up at him, completely blindsided. He wants to be a parent. She thinks, not quite able to process it, that she is possibly the most suspicious person in this entire building, and yet somehow this keeps happening to her. She wonders if this is okay and if this is seriously real. She says Dad softly as Drago smiles, while saying yes and pulling her hands close to his face. She just lets the tears come, quietly, held in the arms of a bear-shaped man. She yells Dad again as Drago says yep. He wraps Chihiro in both arms, holding her against his enormous chest with careful gentleness. Tears run quietly down her cheeks as she thinks, over and over, what a genuinely good person he is. She doesn't say much. Internally screaming thank you. Adulis watches from a discreet distance. He is kind of confused as he notes how the head chef is a bachelor though. Drago then walks away with loud thuds on the ground. Adulis, for his part, laughs with genuine delight. He had no idea things would go this far, but now that they have, he can't think of a better outcome. He calls Drago a truly reliable boss. Drago, still carrying Chihiro, steps outside into the open air of the castle grounds for the first time. Chihiro peeks out from her place against his shoulder and sees it, sky, fountain, wide open space. She has never actually seen the outside of this place. So that's what it's like. Drago says that starting today this is her home. Drago carries her to a large, handsome mansion, his own residence. He shoulders open the door and calls out for Naya and Sasha, his household staff. 2 figures appear in the entrance, a tall, composed man in a butler's formal suit and, beside him, a young maid in black and white uniform. And that maid has ears. The butler apologizes for making the master wait. We see the cat maid's ears twitching. Chihiro's reaction is immediate and completely unfiltered. A beast person. An actual, genuine beast person. She stares with wide-eyed awe, as Drago tells the pair to look after this girl, she is his daughter now. The butler and the maid both stare at the child in their own unique ways. Drago doesn't waste time. He gives the immediate instruction, a bath and a change of clothes, right away. The butler confirms this with practiced calm. Chihiro hears the word bath and is excited. The butler questions Drago about work and says they can take care of the child while he is busy. He pleads with Drago to please return back to work, to which the head chef obliges. Chihiro gets the bath and is helped by the cat maid from before. The cat maid tends to her cheerfully, explaining with obvious pride that the mansion therein was awarded to Lord Drago alongside his title of Baron, recognition for his extraordinary skills as a chef. Chihiro floats in the warm water and processes this information with quiet satisfaction. She notes internally that's why he'll have no trouble raising her. Then the maid rinses out the baby's hair, and something happens. When Chihiro's hair dries, it isn't the dull, dirty color it appeared before. It's gold. Time passes and Drago later returns back to his home. The butler calls the master and says this is perfect timing. He should check on the young lady now as she sleeps quietly. We catch a glimpse of our female lead peacefully in sleep, as we then see Drago has the most shocked expression on his face. Back in the kitchen, Drago summons Adulis with a very serious expression and delivers the news in 2 words, "This is bad. They just cleaned the dirt off the kid." Adulis exclaimed in shock that Chihiro's hair is blonde. In this kingdom, blonde hair is the exclusive mark of royalty. Drago, voice low, walks through the possibilities. Going by age, she could be the 6th, 7th, or 8th princess. And here's the thing, if a royal child had gone missing, it would be a massive public incident. There's been nothing. No announcement, no search. Which suggests she was never meant to be found. She could possibly be an illegitimate child. Drago says they could not raise her so they just abandoned her, or maybe it was to destroy evidence of adultery. Either way, Drago's conclusion is blunt and final, they are scum. Her life may still be in danger. She needs to be hidden. And he is absolutely not letting her go. Adulis, despite everything, manages a quiet thank you, noting sincerely that Drago has not abandoned Chihiro, even now that the stakes have changed dramatically. Drago's answer to the possibility of danger is characteristically direct. If it comes to it, he'll run with her on his shoulder. Who would let a child die? Side note, they need more men like this in Congress. I'm just saying. Adulis thinks about the chef before then, hoping it does not come to this, as Drago then yells to come at him. Then, the next morning, Drago appears at Chihiro's door with something bundled in his hands, a new cloak with a hood, fur-lined and properly worn. He tells her to try it on. Chihiro does, and spins. We see her in the cloak and her small face lit up with pure joy. She then starts to spin 3 times. Drago watches her spin and is completely undone. Sasha clutches her cheeks in delight. The butler observes with dignified composure. It's a whole scene. Then Drago crouches down, pulls up the hood, and becomes serious for a moment. He explains gently but clearly, her hair needs to stay covered when she's outside. She notes how there must be some unpleasant reason. He then says in her eyes, too, when the light hits them at a certain angle, they show gold. She seems surprised by this fact about her eyes. He then grabs a hold of her and says let's go. The butler then questions if he has work, to which he says his daughter is safest with him and what would happen if she got snatched away. The butler says no one is getting snatched at a royal palace. Drago is taken aback by this statement. Before then handing over Chihiro to the maid. Drago tells her to be a good girl and says he will be back soon. She waves with a bright smile, and the word slips out naturally, "See you later, Dad." Drago stands in the entrance of his mansion and absolutely short-circuits. He wonders, asking himself whether children have always been this remarkable, or whether it's specifically Chihiro who is the most cute child in the world. He concludes, obviously, that it's the latter. Drago wants to keep her, but the maid tells him to please compose himself. He is slumped over as he walks out the door. Once things have settled, the butler lays out order. Chihiro is now the daughter of a baron. She will need to call him father. She notes how her pronunciation is bad and how she still bites her tongue. She pulls at her cheeks. The butler says he will not be in charge of her education and that this means studying and learning. She nods as the butler seems surprised that this child understands. He recalls being told by Drago to not judge a book by its cover and how this child is very clever. The first lesson begins immediately. The butler places a picture book in front of her. Chihiro opens it, and something extraordinary happens. She can read it. Not just that, she can see the readings floating visibly above each character like annotations. She blinks. It's clear that she won't be held back by language barriers. The butler says this is a picture book and how he's unsure if she's seen one before. Then Sasha hurries in to interrupt, apologizing for the intrusion, but something is wrong with the household accounts. She's been doing the stock calculations, and the numbers on the wooden tablets don't match the money in the safe. Naya is stunned. The butler takes this seriously immediately. He confirms with her that these are the latest procurement records, and then instructs Sasha that they'll need to recheck every tablet calculation individually, and warns it could take several hours given the volume. That is when Chihiro speaks up. She looks at the page. She points. The calculations are off, she says, in her small toddler voice. Here, this multiplication was recorded incorrectly. And here, this one too. She cites the actual figures from memory. Her casual confidence is due to being able to use abacus at a high level. She is good at mental calculations, and this world appears to use Chinese-style numbering systems. Which is difficult for calculations, and that calculator looks terrible to use. The butler's expression, for the first time. The butler verifies Chihiro's math with the abacus. He says, Chihiro is correct, in a voice that is doing its very best to remain composed. Sasha is stunned by the young lady. Naya notes how the overpayment is significant. Sasha says she will lodge a complaint. Chihiro asks if they buy from merchants, and if this is for the whole palace's food stock. Naya says they buy from farmers directly. Chihiro, sitting on the sofa in her cloak with her small legs dangling, tilts her head and suggests gently that perhaps they should let it go this time. Maybe the farmers supplying the palace aren't actually trying to cheat anyone, they might just not be familiar enough with precise arithmetic to calculate accurately. Rough estimates are what you get when you're working with a numbering system this cumbersome. She pauses, lets the thought settle, and then adds with a small smile, why not prepare a proper calculation reference chart for them to use at the next trade? Even Naya seems to have a hard time with this, so it would be impossible for a farmer. The maid and butler are stunned. The butler is the first to find his voice, and exclaims, how old are you again, exactly? He notes how she cannot be 2 or 3. And that she definitely got the highest education. It might have been even above that of royalty. And she's sitting right there in front of them. He decides to just accept things as they are. This is something that they should be happy about. That evening, when Drago returns, the whole household has gathered. He finds Chihiro with the others and gives her head a good-natured ruffle, declaring with obvious satisfaction that she really is something special. Then he reaches into his coat and tells her he has something for her. It's a pendant. Small, silver-chained, shaped like an apple. He explains that the apple is his family crest, he chose it himself years ago, something he was personally fond of. And on the back, he tells her, her name has been engraved. He reads it aloud, Chihiro La George. That, he says simply, is her name now. If anything ever happens, if anyone ever questions who she is or where she belongs, she shows them this. It is formal paperwork. Official adoption documents, signed and registered. The paperwork states she is the child of a distant relative of his, a cover story for her to be his kid. Chihiro blinks at the documents in his hands. The butler offers his congratulations with a formal inclination of his head. Sasha tells her she looks forward to being with her from now on, her tail ears twitching with warmth. Our female lead starts to tear up once again. Drago wraps her up in his enormous arms and holds her the way he always does. Chihiro, pressed against his chest, and notes how she ended up with great people. She thinks about everything that brought her here. She was abandoned. She came within a breath of dying. She had believed, at the start of all of this, that she simply hadn't been given good parents. And she will never forgive the people responsible for that. She has been given more happiness than she ever expected to have, but that isn't where the story stops. Isn't there something more she can do? She wants to give something back. All right then. When the kitchen staff arrive and start their morning preparations, they notice something is off. The potatoes set out for peeling have already been done. The carrots are trimmed. The dishes are clean. They look around in puzzled appreciation. Then Adulis, grinning with the particular delight of someone who absolutely knows exactly what happened, confirms it with a laugh. The other chefs say their little helper paid a visit. Drago erupts. Where did she go, he demands, spinning around searching for her. She doesn't need to do all of this. From around a corner, A small hooded figure can be seen moving about as her name is yelled. Her pendant catches the light with a quiet flash. She trots away down the corridor. She'll earn her food. She's decided. And she is going to survive in this world with a smile on her bright face. Drago says there is no need for her to help out. To which she says those who don't work, don't eat. Drago hugs her and calls her a good girl for wanting to work while being so small. The scene then shifts to the Frontier Castle kitchen, where we catch up with Adulis. Someone calls to him saying they have 3 things they wanted to talk about. Adulis tells them to continue. The man mentions the other day. Drago had assembled the kitchen staff and has a formal announcement to make. He presents Chihiro, identifying her as the one who had been sneaking in before dawn to finish their unfinished prep work. Drago explains the situation plainly. This is his daughter, it was her own wish to work, and he'd like the kitchen to have her help. Please look after her. The staff member says that is what happened. Their little helper is 2 or maybe 3 years old, and that is absolutely incredible. Adulis grins, saying he was surprised at first too. The man questions if Drago always had that kind of personality. The head chef has first-class skills and is considerate of his employees. Trusted by his employees. The man is shocked that their head chef was acting all doting. Adulis says she makes everyone sweet. Chihiro catalogs what passes for dessert at Drago's mansion: fruits. Unsweetened dried fruits. That's it. She looks around the castle kitchen, scanning every surface, and finds absolutely nothing resembling sweets in the castle kitchen. She spots a plate of dried fruit and asks a nearby cook if she can try this scrap. Sure, they say. She takes a bite. Noting how it was not very sweet at all. Just natural sweetness and no sugar glaze or anything. She turns to Drago with complete composure and asks, very simply, whether they have any sugar or honey. Drago doesn't know what sugar is. He asks, puzzled, if it's some kind of ingredient. Chihiro goes still. And then it lands, a full revelation: this world has no sugar. She processes this in silence. The head cook mentions that honey is difficult to come by and to bring some. A small clay pot is placed before her. Her eyes light up like stars. This brings back memories of her previous life, she thinks. Even if there is no sugar, at least honey exists. Drago says that honey is very precious and even the king does not get it often. Chihiro wonders why and notes how it's only a little bit. Drago ponders for a moment before then grabbing her and telling her to come here for a minute. He brings her to the mansion's upper balcony, and the world opens up. Chihiro's eyes go wide. Stretching before them, gleaming in the daylight, is a breathtaking view of the city. She takes it in, visibly stunned. This is the world. Drago points to that far forest and explains, the beehives are out there. Honey can be gathered from them, but the forest is packed with dangerous beasts and monsters. You can't go in without an escort of knights. Chihiro realizes, so that is why they get it so rarely. Beekeeping. She asks if anyone does it. She explains, you tend the bees yourself, and take a share of their honey as a return. She pats his beard and asks what is wrong, as he's left stunned by her statement. He tells her to listen carefully, to which she says yes. He sternly warns her bees are terrible creatures, they have stingers and can sting or bite you. So she must not get close to them. But to his absolute shock, she simply smiles and says of course they do. He asks in surprise they don't scare her. But she gives a remotely unsettling grin and whispers so the honey is in the forest, which makes her father sweat. She's already one step ahead. If there are bees, they can be lured here. To the garden. For modern people, living without sweets is unbearable. She marches back downstairs and into the front grounds, her mind in full planning mode, and finds the butler standing near the garden path. She tells him, with the calm authority of someone who has run this calculation 3 times already, that she wants raspberries and strawberries planted in the garden, the wild kind that bear fruit. She goes on, wild fruits will bring bees, bees will bring honey. The fruit she can eat herself. 2 birds with 1 stone. The butler says, he understands he'll put in a request to the adventurers, they can retrieve wild plants from the forest. Wild ones that bear fruit. Adventurers. The word hits Chihiro like a thunderclap. Her inner monologue explodes, that classic staple of every fantasy world she'd ever read about. She spins toward the butler, eyes shining, and announces, with a hop, that she wants to see adventurers. She wants to go. The butler crosses his arms, flatly says it's fine. Come along. If, he adds carefully, you receive the master's permission. That is. Chihiro's face goes flat. She already knows the answer. She goes to Drago anyway. He looks at her, arms crossed, and says one word, no. That's what she thought. He wants to tell her the forest is genuinely dangerous, Chihiro, please understand, but she's already walking away down the corridor in silence, her hood low. Drago watches her go, convinced she simply doesn't understand yet. Back at the mansion, Drago quietly pulls the butler aside and suggests that Chihiro might be planning something. He asks Sasha to keep a careful eye on her. Sasha and the butler respond yes sir, however both believe there's absolutely no way someone that small and that cute could scheme. Meanwhile, Chihiro sits in the garden, very small against a wall of blooming flowers, scheming. Should she go herself? Both the fruits and the honey are in the forest. The question hangs in the air but then someone appears and asks her who she is. Chihiro looked up, and standing there in the dappled garden light was a man who absolutely did not belong in a kitchen or a kitchen-adjacent hallway. Chihiro's inner voice, ever practical, reached its verdict immediately, well-dressed. Probably a noble. He has such beautiful light brown hair. Chihiro then did something that visibly surprised him, she dipped into a flawless curtsy. For someone who appeared to be barely 2 or 3 years old, it was startlingly correct. The man stared before thinking to himself, that she looked no older than 3, maybe 2, and that this was an impressive display of manners for one so young. Was she the daughter of a noble? Chihiro admitted she was the daughter of Baron George. Her name was Chihiro. The man tilted his head. He repeated the name back, as Chihiro, with a slight frown of concentration. Chihiro, deep in her own thoughts, noted with dry resignation that apparently pronunciation was genuinely difficult in this world, and that she had gotten very used to hearing her name mangled. The man introduced himself in return, Romer von Ligret. A pleasure to make her acquaintance. Then he asked what she was doing out here. And more to the point, she didn't seem to be in the best spirits. Was something troubling her? Chihiro paused. Her first instinct was to deflect, but then on a second thought, she could get some information out of this. When she told him everything, he looked amused and said so the head chief didn't approve? And warned the forest is actually dangerous. When she pouted, he covered a soft laugh with his hand. She could act like a child, he observed. Interesting. What a mysterious little girl. Then he offered, simply, he would lend a hand. How about this, they would have a picnic in the forest. He would come to collect her the following day, around noon. She should be ready to go. Chihiro blinked up at him, taken completely off guard. She watched him turn and walk away down the garden path, trying to process what had just happened. Was he an adventurer? She dismissed it almost immediately. No way. He was far too polished for that. And yet, the next day arrived, and Romer von Ligret returned precisely as promised, arriving at the mansion gates on horseback, riding a white horse with the kind of casual elegance that suggested this was simply how he traveled. The weather was lovely, he remarked as he greeted Chihiro. A fine afternoon for a picnic. She froze in disbelief, they are knights. He causally said he promised he would lend her a hand, didn't he? With knights to guard her, even the head chef shouldn't have any complaints. They should go to the forest. Chihiro stared at the assembled group and looked horrified. Behind those wide eyes, the gears were already turning. Was this normal? Who deploys knights at the whim of a child? She looked to the butler, who had gone completely rigid beside Sasha, who looked equally horrified. See? This wasn't Norman. But Romer, meeting Chihiro's wide-eyed stare with a calm smile, simply asked if they are going to the forest right. Chihiro gave a forced smile, sweating. Did she even have the right to refuse? He's clearly used to giving orders, high rank. Very high. Chihiro gave a single nod. Oh well. She wanted to go to the forest. Romer simply picked her up and said he shall be looking after the young lady. Chihiro waved goodbye to them both with cheerful brightness. See you later, Naya, Sasha. After they left, the butler screamed to inform the master at once. And then threw up his hands, good grief young lady. On the way Chihiro cautiously asked is his position important. He smiled and told her she can call him Romer. Or he supposed she could say he was more or less royalty. She froze in disbelief. He added but he didn't have much official business. He was just hanging around. She could call him a freeloader. She thought well there are a lot of different royals. Maybe he was among the lower ones. Almost as an aftermath, he added he didn't possess the golden gleam like her. Chihiro heard about it from her dad. But her eyes are not gold. They are more of a beige color. Why did he say that? And then the city unfolded before Chihiro as they rode through it. The architecture was stunning, Renaissance in scale and detail, all domed rooftops and grand facades stretching along wide, tree-lined avenues. She had glimpsed it from the mansion balcony with Drago, but being inside it was different entirely. Then Romer asked her, "Isn't it hot under the hood?" Chihiro grabbed her hood with both hands in immediate reflex. Her inner voice fired off a rapid sequence, he would see her blonde hair. She blurted her dad said she shouldn't show her hair. When he gave her no response, and became too still, she started fearing for her life. Was that kind of attitude not appropriate for loyalty? But then she dared to take a look at his face, and to her relief, he looked more in deep thought than angry. The breath she had been holding slipped out, and so did her balance. She fell back, right into him. Around her, the entire night courtyard burst out laughing, all of them at once. Romer pressed a hand over his mouth. His eyes were crinkled. He couldn't help but think what an adorable creature, he could watch her forever. Though he had to admit she quite a mix of grown-up and childish. He also wondered if she had experience in horse riding at this age. She wasn't scared and was maintaining her posture while matching the rhythm. While Chihiro thought this was her first time, but it was fun, the random knowledge she had gotten surfing the web was super useful. Out of new, Romer asked her why did the head chef tell her not to show her face. She stilled, thinking about it too. He specifically said her hair, but she didn't know the reason as well. She decided to just blame it on Dad being a doting parent. She admitted he said she will get snatched away if she shows herself. For a moment, he stilled in surprise, but as he thought about it, it made sense. She was quite pretty. Perfection that resembled some sort of angel or fairy. There were many who desired that. They reached the forest and Romer announced their arrival. And Chihiro's brain snapped back to mission focus with the force of a rubber band. The forest. Berries. And if possible, honey. Her eyes went starry. Romer confirmed they would proceed on foot from here. He turned to Chihiro and asked she wanted wild berry seedlings. Yes. He turned to Harold and asked if he knew where to find them. Harold, with the absolute minimum of expression, admitted that he did not. Romer considered this, glanced at Chihiro, and suggested, mildly, that perhaps they should have brought a gardener. Chihiro stared at him. Then she grabbed his ear, thinking with devastating seriousness, that this was extremely important. Romer burst out laughing, a proper, unguarded laugh, and yelped in surprised amusement as she smacked at him indignantly. The knights lost their composure again entirely. Harold, standing a short distance away, watched Romer's shoulders shake with laughter and felt something shift in his chest. He noted, quietly, that Romer very rarely allowed himself to let go to this extent. It was unusual. How rare. Romer, still laughing, caught Chihiro's small fists and held them gently. He apologized for teasing her, and then he produced a small wrapped cookie. Here, he said. A peace offering. She could have this. Chihiro stared at the cookie. Her eyes went enormous. A cookie. He laughed again at her reaction. She was a funny child. While she thought it was her first sweet treat since coming into this world, aside from the dried fruits, as expected of royal table scraps. And then she actually tasted it. The cookie was barely sweet. No honey. No glaze. Just the faint, ghostly sweetness of plain flour and butter. The light went out of her eyes in real time. Romer stared at her. Then he slumped. He asked if it wasn't good. With visible effort, she forced out it was delicious, thank you very much. Romer, quietly horrified, began to wonder aloud, if this was what royalty served, and it apparently wasn't sweet enough for the head chef's daughter, did the head chef make something even better for his child at home? He had to find out. He had to question Drago about this when they returned. What mattered more urgently, however, was the mission at hand. Chihiro had grown up in the countryside in her previous life. She knew what berries looked like. Whether this world's plants matched Earth's exactly remained to be seen, but it was the best lead she had. And almost immediately, she spotted something. Chihiro's face cracked open into pure, unguarded joy. She ran toward it across the grass with her arms out, announcing the discovery to no one and everyone at once, raspberries. They'd found them. And they were exactly like the ones back home. Romer instructed the knights to get the whole plant out from the roots. 2 knights materialized with shovels, apparently conjured from nowhere, which prompted Chihiro to blink and ask where on earth they had come from. Romer explained, mildly, that it was magic. Small items could be sealed inside a compact ball and retrieved when needed. Chihiro stopped walking. Magic. This world has magic. Romer explained there were many nobles among the knights who could use magic. Of course, as a royal he could as well. Though the only ones who could use magic were in their kingdom. Thanks to magic, their medicine and technology have advanced. As a result, their average life expectancy is significantly longer compared to other countries. Her eyes started shining and she said she wanted to use magic too. Romer considered this. If she's the daughter of the head chef, would she be a commoner? Then likely not much. Perhaps only daily life magic like kindling fries. But then looked at her, looking at him with hopeful eyes. He assured her if she tried hard, she could. There was a brief commotion when the first digging attempt went badly. The roots of the raspberry bush were severed too close, and Chihiro marched over to examine the damage with the gravity of a site inspector. This plant would wither, she announced. The main roots had been cut. They needed to dig wider. The knight who had done it apologized and started over. Chihiro watched, then began explaining, with startling fluency, the full biology of the raspberry. These plants can regenerate each year from root systems alone, which made them extremely resilient, but also prone to spreading aggressively underground and taking over a garden if not properly managed. You needed to harvest roots and basal shoots, not just pull at the plant. Romer and Knights both went quiet as she spoke. Romer looked at her with the expression of a man realizing something and said she knows quite a bit. She realized too late that she'd probably said more than she should have and quickly composed her face. Luckily, no one pressed her on it. Chihiro's sharp eyes caught a silverberry bush to one side, and then gooseberries beyond that. The forest was generous, and the hull was growing. She scooped up a handful of the dark, rich soil and held it up with a grin that took up her whole face. Good soil. What a lucky forest. The knights around her started smiling too. Romer watched her closely throughout. His expression had shifted since the laughter earlier, something more intent had settled beneath the easy warmth. At one point, while Chihiro was crouching beside the raspberry plant examining the roots, the sunlight caught her eyes at the right angle and they flickered, just briefly, gold. Romer's breath went still. It couldn't be, but before he could dwell more, a faint tattoo-like marking on the back of his hand caught the light and seemed to pulse faintly, and then the forest went tense. A sound rose from the tree, lean, low, droning, deeply wrong, and the knights were already moving before anyone had time to process it. Harold's voice cut across everything, weapons out. He realized they wandered into their territory. Chihiro stilled, sweating profusely as Romer tensely warned her to not move. A bee. A single enormous bee, hovering in the sky above them, easily 60 centimeters long. And behind it, dozens more. Chihiro's face went completely hollow. Drago had told her bees were dangerous. He had said they sting and bite. He had said all of this. But he had failed to mention one critical detail, that they were the size of small dog. She looked terrified. Romer admitted they are in trouble, those things are the master of the forest. A fearsome opponent. We normally used magic to defeat them. But they couldn't be stopped. Even if they injured one of them, the whole swarm would attack. And not only them but the whole kingdom might end up getting attacked. Her face paled. If she had known this forest was so dangerous, she would still come. But if she was on her own, it would have been no one's responsibility but hers. Romer suddenly stepped forward and said there was no helping it. He might not be powerful, but he had to try. Harold quickly grabbed her and warned Romer was going to give power to the bees. Monsters attack humans as an easy way to obtain magic power. They consumed magic power. That is why if they released magic power and give it to intelligent monsters, they will back down. This was their blunder. They somehow stepped into their territory at some point. Chihiro stilled. It was her fault. Romer had been carrying her around the forest all afternoon, distracted by her. His senses had been dulled, because of her. Chihiro stared at Romer's back as he stood alone in the clearing surrounded by the swarm, and the guilt hit her like cold water. She called his name. Romer stood completely still at the center of the formation, bees orbiting him at close range, and released his magical energy outward as an offering. The bees closed in from all sides, pressing against him, and then, his legs gave out. The knights lurched forward and stopped. Any movement toward him now would read as aggression. Harold called out in open alarm. Chihiro identified the problem immediately. Romer was out of magic, and the knights couldn't act without triggering the swarm. He was already of magic and they were getting close. Panicking, she didn't think about it. She just moved. Harold shouted her name as she broke away from him and sprinted across the grass toward Romer. Were they going to eat him? She dropped to her knees beside him, threw herself over his chest, and planted herself there. She squeezed her eyes shut and screamed at them to stop. Just stop. An explosion of magical energy detonated outward from her in a wave and the bees jumped in to receive it. Harold and the knights could only watch in disbelief as the light tore through the clearing, bees tumbling away from the blast radius. Harold was the first to call out, "Lord Romer. Young lady. Are you all right?" There was no immediate answer. But when the light faded, Romer was sitting up. Romer looked at her hair that had come loose, a platinum blonde that was almost silver. The blonde hair that was proof of royal blood. And the lighter the color, the higher the magic power. Her eyes were also light. Who on earth was she? Before either of them could process what had just happened, they realized something else. The bees had not retreated entirely. They were still present, hovering at the edge of the clearing, watching. Chihiro jumped into his arms and shouted, "Why were there so many?" She wouldn't let them eat him. His eyes widened in shock. She was trying to save him. With that tiny body of hers. He was impressed and amused at once. And then a voice came from among them. Chihiro flinched. The nearest large bee spoke, clearly, in language she understood, and told her curtly that they did not eat humans. How rude of her to assume. Even Romer told her the bees don't eat humans. He provided too much magic so bees' children were only going to return some. She looked back at Romer and asked him, so it was a misunderstanding. He smiled and nodded. Chihiro clapped her hands over her face and died internally. She had been absolutely certain. She apologized completely. The bee then asked, "For that matter, can she hear it?" She replied yes she could. Even Romer looked shocked. The bee admitted she had come here today for a specific reason. She had sensed golden magic. She had known immediately that the source must be a sovereign, and it seemed she had been correct. Will she form a contact with her? Chihiro stared at her and asked, very carefully, "What is a sovereign?" The bee, who now descended to address them directly, enormous and close, introduced herself. She was Queen Melda, master of this forest. And every forest has a master, she said, an entity like herself, a keeper of the living world beneath the trees. But among humans, only once every several hundred years does someone appear carrying the rare golden magic at its highest intensity. That person is called the sovereign. All masters of the forest swear an oath to the sovereign. In exchange, the sovereign provides magical energy, which allows the forest itself to be restored and renewed. The sovereign serves as the head of all the forest's keepers, and they remain bound to that sovereign for the rest of their life. Chihiro sat in the grass and stared at Queen Melda. In other words, if they establish a contract, the bee receives magic's power from her and restore the forest. Queen Melda leaned forward, enormous and expectant, antennae wriggling with barely contained urgency, and began formally beseeching her sovereign, with great earnestness and considerable imposing physical presence, to honor her with a new contract. Chihiro looked at this massive, ancient, extremely sincere queen bee, thought about everything she had just been told. She did not fully understand this yet. She needed to look into some things first. So for now, postponed. The queen looked thoroughly rejected. However, Romer stood there in disbelief. Why is she the golden sovereign? The gold sovereign is only born to the royal family once every several hundred years. Both their hair and eyes gleam gold and they can speak with the masters of the forest. So it wasn't just his imagination when he noticed that her eyes were golden. The golden sovereign's eyes will eventually become true gold. He still knows nothing about her. In this world of Arcadia, magic lives on in their kingdom frontier alone. However, the source of that magic is when the golden sovereign forms contracts and revitalizes the forests with the energized forest masters. Other nations failed to recognize this and destroyed their masters of the forest, leading to the decline of the forests. Then, to understand why magic continues only in frontier, there have been numerous acts of espionage. They can't tell the other countries the decimated forests around the world wouldn't be restored. Even if they discover the inner workings, it will only cause an eruption. If she were to form the contract, then frontier will be secure for another few hundred years. That makes her the most important person. The greatest of state secrets. Romer finds himself asking again, just who is she truly? The queen looks heartbroken and says that is unfortunate. In that case, she shall return the magic power that she was given by her. However, Chihiro smiles brightly and tells her she doesn't need to return the magic if she gives them some honey. Queen Melda blinked, or did whatever the giant bee equivalent of blinking was, and asked, with genuine uncertainty, whether that was really acceptable to her. Chihiro's answer was immediate and absolute, yeah. Queen Melda, apparently charmed by this, produced a large container of honey on the spot. She could provide that any time, she said warmly. Chihiro grabbed the container with both arms and let out a triumphant cry. After everything, she had gotten the honey. Mission accomplished. The farewell between them was brief and genuine. Chihiro thanked Melda by name, told her she was heading home but would come back, and Queen Melda watched her with something that sounded suspiciously like fondness rippling through the swarm. Then, in a tone that shifted the temperature of the entire clearing, the queen addressed the knights and Romer directly. If the sovereign desired their protection, the Bee clan would build a stronghold in the forest itself. And if anyone, including the royal family, caused the sovereign displeasure, the entire clan would rise against them. Was that understood? Romer looked tense and said he shall keep that in mind. Chihiro went into his arms and apologized. He held her close and told they should go back. She started jumping in joy when he put her back. But then unexpectedly he grinned at her and told he is sorry to interrupt her joy, but would she tell him about her golden hairs? She hesitated. She didn't know about it either. The return to the castle grounds was a different kind of chaos entirely. Word spread through the staff the moment the riders came into view on the road. Someone shouted for the head chef immediately, and Chihiro arrived to a small crowd of castle workers calling her nickname. The little helper was back, and demanding to know if her father had made her stand watch. Rema repeated little helper. She looked embarrassed and said it was her nickname. He said it suits her, it's cute. Then Drago arrived. He practically snatched Chihiro off the horse, then he turned on Romer with the full force of a protective father who had spent the entire day imagining disaster, demanding to know what business His Majesty's brother, the prince, had carrying her into the forest without a single word of warning. Chihiro went completely still in his arms. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes had gone very round. His Majesty's brother, the prince. Romer looked back at her with that same calm, unhurried expression, and mentioned, almost pleasantly, that he was, in fact, the king's fourth younger brother. Had he forgotten to bring that up? Romer said there had been a misunderstanding. He'd thought Drago already knew. He told Chihiro he would come personally to collect his daughter. He turned his gaze directly to Drago. He wanted to speak with him, he said, about what was hidden beneath the hood his daughter wore. Drago went rigid. Chihiro, still tucked against her father's chest, looked up at Romer with a tense expression. In the present one side, Romer with pale, unreadable eyes is watching her. On the other side, she is looking at him wide, trembling eyes watching him carefully. Chihiro can't help but notice that this person is nothing like the way she remembers him, laughing freely out in the forest somewhere. Here, in this setting, he is being super proper. Romer settles onto the sofa and casually asks why is a child of the royal family here. Chihiro's face freezes in pure shock. He figured it out. The massive chef explains he found her tucked away and forgotten in a corner of the castle. From the circumstances, he assumed she must have been an illegitimate child of someone in the royal line, abandoned, and left behind. Drago continues, his voice steady as he explains that the place where Chihiro was left isn't just any forgotten corner, it used to be a holding cell for criminals. Now it's been sealed off entirely. Whether whoever left her there knew that or not, what they did was deeply, terribly wrong. And then the second gut punch hits Chihiro like a thunderbolt. Her father knew all along. He'd been aware of her origins this entire time. Romer sets down his teacup and speaks with quiet certainty. He says it's plainly apparent that Chihiro carries royal blood, because she possesses something unmistakable, the golden gleam. Chihiro blinks. Golden gleam. She has absolutely no idea what that means. She's heard it mentioned before, but it's never been explained to her. Romer describes it as a trait unique to the royal bloodline, a luminous quality, a color that seems to glow as if lit from within. He goes deeper into the history. The golden gleam traces all the way back to the founder of the Kingdom of Frontier, a figure who possessed both golden hair and golden eyes. That radiant color became so iconic it was given its own name, the gleam. But here's the thing, those who carry it today are vanishingly rare. In most cases, it shows up in either the hair or the eyes, but almost never both. Having the full combination is extraordinarily uncommon. Romer recites the current roster of those who carry the trait. The king and the second prince carry it in their hair, the first prince carries it in his eyes. Beyond them, the king's sixth younger brother and the second royal consort's hair also bear the mark. That's how few there are. And as this information washes over Chihiro, something clicks into place in her mind. So that's why she was told to hide her hair. If anyone glimpsed it, she'd be exposed immediately. It all makes sense now. And Drago had always known. She is grateful to him for making her his daughter. Romer however wonders leaving the palace is easy but getting there requires a thorough examination. In other words, could she have secretly been raised inside the castle? That aside, who are her parents? His eyes suddenly widen, and he mumbles it could be. Drago immediately asks what it is. He calmly admits Chihiro might have been born into the royal family. 2 years ago, the 8th princess and the prince were born. They were and her cry might have been one of them. He then asks Drago if he suspected all this, why didn't he report it to the royal family? Drago answers without hesitation. She was left in a basement without food or water for days. When he found her, she was so filthy that even her golden hair wasn't visible. He tells Romer what Chihiro herself remembers, only a maid. Just a maid, leaving her there and walking away. Romer goes quiet. Drago says slowly, if she hadn't managed to escape that room on her own, she would have died. And then he makes the conclusion that no one in the room wants to say out loud, whoever left her there didn't do it by accident. That was the intent. The royal family had wanted Chihiro dead. Chihiro reaches the final piece of truth she's been circling this whole time, she is the 8th princess. A princess of this kingdom. And she was thrown away like she was nothing. She stares forward with wide, dark, unreadable eyes. Her father calls out her name softly. She looks up at her father and asks what's going on. Drago exhales, a long, slow breath that carries the weight of everything he was just about to say, and tells her it's nothing. Across the room, Romer does the same, visibly composing himself. Both of them collecting themselves in the span of a breath. Then Romer tells Drago that he'll be reporting the matter directly to the king, and that it will be up to his majesty to decide how to proceed. He adds firmly, that this is to be kept in complete secrecy. Not a word to anyone. A flicker of something sharp moves across Chihiro's face. She thinks it through in silence. The king, the one who supposedly decides how things are handled. Isn't he the very person at the center of all this? The one ultimately responsible. She doesn't want anything to happen to her father or the people around her because of her. And before she can spiral any further, Drago says it without hesitation, she is his daughter now. He will not tolerate any unnecessary actions against her. Tears well up at the corners of Chihiro's eyes. The panel pulls back to show the three of them, the mustachioed butler standing just behind, the beastkin maid girl beside him, and Drago seated with Chihiro close at his side, and Romer watching them with quiet, unreadable eyes. He takes in the scene, Baron George and his loyal household. They already see her as their daughter and their young mistress. Romer calls her name gently. Chihiro turns. And Romer simply tells her that he won't let anything bad happen to her. Those big dark eyes soften into the smallest, most tentative smile, then, with the explosive energy only a toddler can generate immediately after an emotionally devastating conversation, Chihiro announces that the serious talk is over and goes pitter-pattering out of the room at full speed before anyone can stop her. Her father asks where she's going. She announces cheerfully over her shoulder that she's heading to the kitchen, she wants to make sweets, Dad has to help, and by the way, she got honey from Melda. Drago furrows his brow at the name, asking who she is. Romer, his expression shifting into nervousness. He informs Drago that Melda would be Queen Melda, the master of the forest. Drago's eyes go wide as dinner plates. Meanwhile in the kitchen, a pot bubbles away contentedly, entirely unaware of the chaos its honey has caused. Cut to the kitchen, where Chihiro is already at work. She and Drago stand at the massive stone hearth together, and Chihiro directs the operation with complete confidence for someone who barely comes up to the counter. She explains the process: whip the honey together with egg whites until they hold their shape, that makes meringue. Drago holds the bowl steady and asks if he's doing it right. She says yes. Chihiro throws both arms up and declares the whole operation a complete success. Then comes the real moment of triumph, the sharing. Chihiro announces to the full table that this honey was brought back by everyone together, so everyone gets to try it. And then they taste it, the reaction is unanimous and overwhelming. One declares it impossibly fluffy. Another marvels that the white part dissolves the moment it touches your tongue. A third can't get enough of the sweet, tangy sauce. The cookies earn equal praise, light, soft, with the jam at the center balancing perfectly against the buttery dough. Romer lifts a small piece to his lips with characteristic composure, and then goes very still. Meanwhile Chihiro herself is radiating pure joy, jamming a cookie into her mouth with both hands and announcing with absolute conviction that sweet things are the best things in the entire world. Romer watches this all quietly, and something clicks for him that he can't quite shake. He remembers a moment back in the forest. Chihiro had been visibly disappointed about something at the time, and now he finally understands what she was comparing against. She had already tasted sweets she thought were better. For a child who has only ever lived inside a castle's walls, that kind of knowledge is baffling. Where did she even learn to make something like this? Just who exactly is she? Far away from the parlors and kitchens and sweet smells, a very different scene is unfolding. At a plain building on the edge of the city, a sharp-featured woman with her dark hair pinned up stands rigid with fury. Her voice cuts like a blade as she demands to know what they're saying. They failed. They couldn't obtain Lady Fatima. One of the agents confirms it. Yes, they failed. Their mission was to extract someone called Lady Fatima from a designated room inside the castle, but they simply couldn't do it. The reason was there were too many knights stationed both inside and along the walls. They were spotted, and once that happened, causing any kind of commotion in the town was out of the question. They tried everything available to them, but in the end, they had no choice but to retreat. Cyril explodes. She demands to know if they have any idea how long ago this opportunity was set in motion. How dare they come back empty-handed? The agents, clearly fearing her, try to defend themselves. They insist they did everything they possibly could. But Cyril has no patience and she snaps. She didn't lock the door when she left. She had expected Fatima to be taken out immediately, so she saw no reason to secure it. But the door is heavy, far too heavy for a small child to open on her own. Fatima was left inside with only a minimal amount of food and water. And no one ever visits that particular room. Cyril screams it out loud, she'll die. The agent simply says it can't be helped. Bad luck. Cyril rounds on them all. She reminds them of the scale of what they invested in this. They infiltrated the kingdom of Frontier. They spent 10 years building toward this single opportunity. They poured enormous effort into raising that child specifically for this purpose. And they were so close. They were supposed to bring a royal back to their country. To throw all of that away because of bad luck is incomprehensible to her. Then she says something that reframes everything. The name, Fatima, the name given to that child, is the name of an ancient prophet. She gave it to the girl herself. The child was meant to become a maiden of destiny, a figure who would save Cyril's homeland. That was the entire purpose. She then turns away from them, hand resting on the door, and speaks in a low voice. They have to restart. Raise another spy from the beginning. The door shuts behind her with a decisive click. Left alone on the other side, Cyril exhales. She says it quietly, she's so tired. And then we get her story. She came to the kingdom of Frontier 10 years ago. She arrived as a lady's maid, accompanying a noblewoman called Lady Havlish, who had been sent to marry into the royal family, to become the second royal consort. Cyril came with her, along with a group of compatriots from her homeland, all of them entering the castle under the cover of service. Their goal was never simply to serve. They wanted to understand why this kingdom, and only this kingdom, still possessed magic. When Cyril first arrived, she was immediately overwhelmed. She came from poverty. Back in her homeland, she had watched her people huddle around hearths with barely enough to survive on. Here in Frontier, the ceilings were gilded, the architecture breathtaking, the standard of living almost incomprehensible. And the reason for all of it was magic. The royals and high-ranking nobles wielded it to power the very foundations of their civilization, creating, building, sustaining everything. In Cyril's homeland, they had learned only the barest traces of magic, never enough to truly use it. Seeing what Frontier had built with it was equal parts awe and fury. So the plan was formed. If they could seize a royal, someone who carried the blood and the power, and bring them home, then her people could finally access that magic too. But to take a royal directly was far too dangerous. A child would need to be born. and born in a way that could be controlled. The opportunity came when consort Havlish became pregnant. Around that same time, something else happened. The queen consort also went into labor, unexpectedly early. The timing created chaos inside the castle. All the available physicians rushed to attend the queen consort, leaving only one doctor to assist with Havlish's delivery. That one doctor, it turned out, was the only person in the birthing room who wasn't one of Cyril's people. The birth came. And then, a cry. Another cry. They were twins. A second baby. The room went tense with shock. In that moment, Cyril recognized what it was, a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Almost everyone present was already a compatriot. And they even went so far as to hide her birth. She acquired a girl child. With light-colored hair, a mark of high levels of magic power. Until she was old enough to withstand the long journey back to their country, she raised her in secret. She threatened the second prince's wet nurse and had her look after the child in a room inside the inner palace. And as the infant slept in her arms, Cyril looked down at her with something that looked almost like tenderness. She murmured to the baby that she was Lady Fatima, and that one day, she would be the savior of their nation. She even called her adorable. But the warmth curdled almost immediately into something clinical and terrifying. Because in the very next breath, Cyril explained what she intended to do next, administer a medicine that would deliberately delay the child's brain development, keeping her cognitively suppressed, ignorant, and compliant. And when the time came to fully bend her to their purposes, brainwashing would handle the rest. The twins were now a few months old. Cyril watched them together and noted with interest just how undeniably alike they were. The wet nurse dressed with exact clothes to go for a walk on Cyril's suggestion. Staying locked up indoors would be bad for Fatima's health, and so Cyril took her outside, into the castle gardens, where they would sometimes cross paths with the royal couple themselves. The king and queen were always present, always warm, always smiling, never knowing it wasn't their son but daughter that they were holding. Cyril spent those months trying to find a way to get Fatima out. And she quickly discovered how impossible it was. The castle's security against theft and kidnapping was extraordinarily tight. Knights checked the contents of baskets and even the inside of garments at the gates. Anyone attempting to leave with an unauthorized person, let alone a child, would be caught immediately. Even with all her planning, Cyril couldn't find a crack to exploit. So they needed something bigger. Cyril decided the only way was a coordinated operation. Her allies on the outside would create simultaneous disturbances across several points in the city, drawing the knights' attention and thinning their numbers. In the chaos, her people inside the castle would move, get Fatima to a room on the outskirts of the castle, and use the confusion to spirit her out. Cyril disguised herself and personally carried the girl to the designated holding room, a quiet, out-of-the-way space where she could be kept until the extraction team arrived the next day. Cyril held the child close, pressing her forehead against hers, and whispered that she was so sorry to leave her in a place like this. She told her to be patient, her comrades would come for her tomorrow, and then they'd meet again at the villa outside the city. She squeezed Fatima one last time, breathed out a desperate wish for her to stay safe, and walked away down the long stone corridor alone. Now she is sobbing, she has failed Fatima, she surely passed away. She prays for her to rest in peace. Meanwhile, at the exact same moment, somewhere safe and warm inside Drago's residence, Chihiro flopped contentedly onto a soft bed with a happy groan, announcing to no one in particular that having sweets, having a family, and living as a baron's daughter was genuinely paradise. She flopped around with pure, uncomplicated joy. But as she lies there drifting, half dreaming, her mind wanders to the kingdom around her. She notices, even in the streets outside, that the common people here live well, that the king seems to actually be governing effectively. And she notes with a strange mixture of emotions that the king and queen appear in her fragmented early memories as warm, smiling figures who held her often. Her wet nurse, her ladies-in-waiting, they had all been kind to her. And then one memory surfaces that makes her pause. The day that Cyril came, in that strange maid's uniform, and led her down to the basement room. Something stirs. A name. Fatima. She'd called her Fatima. Was that her name? Or rather, was it that name she used? Cyril is the one who raised her. She knows that now. That means both her birth parents and the one person who cared for her in place of them, all of them threw her away. Chihiro's eyes sharpen. Whatever softness had been there a moment ago goes very still. She thinks it plainly, regardless of everything, she nearly died. And she does not forgive the king and queen for that. Not at all. A large man with wild, spiky hair sits across from Chihiro in what appears to be a meeting room. He introduces himself formally, Herald, Captain of the Knights. And he has a business proposition. He asks whether Lady Chihiro would consider officially supplying her sweets to the Knight's order. Chihiro blinks at him over the rim of her teacup and asks why, tilting her head in genuine confusion. Herald explains, a little sheepishly. After the tasting at the parlor some days ago, several knights who'd had samples simply could not get the flavors out of their heads. They came asking for more and the word spread through the barracks until it had caused, in Herald's words, quite the fuss. He leans forward with a look of weary desperation and tells her the sweets are making his knights fight each other over who gets them. He needs her to help bring order back to his unit. Chihiro's face cycles through several expressions, landing on something between flattery and alarm, as Herald delivers the final plea, please, for the sake of discipline, make it official. Chihiro, the little helper, becomes a small-scale confectionery supplier to the castle's Knight Order. The scene shifts to the Knight's headquarters, an imposing, grand building that makes Chihiro look even tinier than usual as she arrives with the butler and the beastkin maid-girl, carrying trays and baskets covered with pristine white cloth. Herald greets them warmly, thanking the Baron's daughter again for her support. Around them, knights who have been drilling with their swords drop everything and abandon their sparring at the first shout, the little helper's treats have arrived. Chaos ensues immediately as the word ripples through the assembled knights with the speed of a battle alarm. Chihiro stands in front of the display and rattles off the menu with the energy of a market vendor 3 times her age. Cakes today come plain or with dried fruit, cookies are jam-filled or nut-topped, and the crepes are available with apple or custard cream. The assembled knights respond with a collective roar that rattles the stonework. They surge forward in a wave, and the butler immediately calls for order, 3 items per person, no more, while the maid-girl handles the actual distribution with practiced calm. One knight demands 2 custard crepes. Another wants one of everything. Herald stands to the side and quietly reminds everyone that this is to be kept confidential. If it spreads beyond the knights, it'll cause complications. Chihiro, pressed on all sides by enormous armored hands reaching for her wares, laughs. It's a big, unguarded laugh, the kind that takes over her whole face. After the sale, the 3 of them walk back through the grounds, Chihiro bouncing along between her 2 companions. The maid-girl remarks that today was quite something again, and Chihiro agrees wholeheartedly, she's glad everyone seemed so happy. The butler frowns slightly and says what he actually thinks, those knights are a brazen lot. Is it really appropriate, he wonders, for the young lady to be doing this sort of thing? The maid-girl counters with a small smile, that's true, she supposes. But she is their master's daughter, after all. The butler absorbs this and concedes, well, yes. That is true. Chihiro, walking ahead of them lets out a soft, pleased laugh to herself and says nothing. Chihiro muses inwardly, who would have guessed that Queen Melda's honey would turn out to be such a major asset? Drago had explained it to her, even royals and high nobility rarely have access to honey in this world. There's no sugar here at all. Honey is the only sweetener, and it's extraordinarily scarce. Frontier holds a near monopoly on it. The reason the kingdom has any at all is because the enormous bees of the region periodically migrate to new nests, leaving behind the honey in their old ones. That leftover harvest is what Frontier's workers carefully collect. No other country has access to anything like it. And Queen Melda, the ruler of the forest those bees inhabit, essentially gifted Chihiro a seemingly inexhaustible supply, telling her to take as much of the old honey as she wanted. She now has honey the way other people have water. Meanwhile, unknown to Chihiro, the security apparatus around her has quietly tightened. Outside the estate gates, a pair of knights complete their shift handoff. One confirms to the other that Lady Chihiro has returned safely to the estate. The surrounding areas and approaches to the residence are all covered, the next shift is already on rotation, and, crucially, the household hasn't noticed they're being watched. The knight receiving the report nods. Good. These orders come directly from Lord Romer. And then the final command, delivered to a full assembly of knights in what appears to be a formal briefing: protect Lady Chihiro of the House of Baron George with even greater care than you would protect His Majesty the King. To preserve her way of life and keep her identity secret, those are the standing orders. Inside, a new figure blocks Chihiro's path entirely. She stops. Standing in front of her is a child, a boy, roughly her age, short and solidly built, dressed in finely tailored clothes that immediately signal wealth and rank. He has dark hair cut in a blunt fringe, sharp dark eyes. He plants himself in front of Chihiro, stares her down, and demands in a voice that expects obedience, "Are you the one they call the little helper?" Chihiro's eyes go wide. She immediately gets a very bad feeling about this. Then the boy stomps forward, clearly unhappy that Chihiro hasn't answered yet. He repeats himself with full force indignation. He asked her a question and he expects an answer. He even stomps right up close to emphasize the point. Before the situation can escalate further, the kitchen door bursts open. A chef quickly intervenes. "No violence," he screams. Another man also intervenes, grabbing the boy. Chihiro recalls he is called Dorahin. The boy's retainers react immediately. They announce in outraged tones how dare a mere knight lay hands on their young master. This, they declare, is the eldest son of Count Maine, the Honorable Lord Ralphrate. However, the knight ignores them and simply picks him up like a sack of potatoes. He then strolls about the kitchen and throws the boy on the floor, who looks mortified. He then announces clearly that this young lady is the daughter of Baron George, and beyond that, the personal favorite cook of His Majesty's own brother, Prince Romer. Everything and everyone within these castle kitchens falls under the king's purview. Laying hands on her would constitute disrespect toward the royal family itself. Ralphrate stares up at him with wide, indignant eyes. Ralphrate, landing on the ground and processing this development, sputters, "The daughter of a baron?" Even his men pale. Even the prince. One of men cover his out before he can say more and land them in trouble. Dorfin winks at Chihiro, a quick, light gesture that lands like a reassurance. The assembled knights buzz with excitement. Since when was the little helper the prince's personal favorite? Is she really the king's majesty's property? Well, she guesses her titles are increasing. In the aftermath, Romer issues updated security instructions through official channels. Guards will be stationed permanently at the kitchen entrance from now on. Anyone who speaks carelessly about the sweets will face formal reprimand. He reviews the latest incident report from behind a stack of papers and mutters, barely audibly, that the items on the reports he's writing for his brother just keep growing. He pauses. Then, allowing a very faint private smile, "Well, she certainly can't stay still. She is pretty cute, though." Chihiro, meanwhile, has already moved on to her next idea. She bounces up to the gate the following day with bright energy and announces heading out on an errand. The guard, slightly baffled, hands her a pass and tells her not to lose it. He comments that it's quite dutiful of someone her size. Chihiro thanks him sincerely and disappears. She has apparently done her homework. She's noticed through careful observation that the merchant entrance is significantly easier to pass through, fewer bag checks, less scrutiny of clothing, and has used exactly that knowledge to slip through with a cheerful wave and a suppressed giggle. Behind her, a small group of knights stand at the gate in collective despair. They've lost her. There is a long pause in which no one says what they're all thinking. Then someone mentions that Prince Romer is going to hear about this. The scene cuts to Romer himself, slamming a door open with considerable force and ordering the search to begin immediately. He then clutches his head in disbelief. Didn't Baron George tell her she would be kidnapped if people saw her face? She needs to be more aware of how adorable she is. Meanwhile, Chihiro is happily walking on a cobblestone street, stepping out into the open town for the very first time. She has her reasons for stepping out. But she is determined to have some fun while she is at it. The streets of the kingdom were unusually busy that morning. Knights on horseback clattered across the cobblestones, their mounts moving with urgency through the winding town roads. People realize something must have happened, as it seems like there are a lot of knights. From behind a doorway, a pair of wide, curious eyes watched the procession go by. Chihiro, peeking out, mused, they really do work hard keeping everything in order, she thought. But she had her own business to attend to. Stepping inside a nearby shop, Chihiro requested a map. The shopkeeper looked down at her with an amused smile and asked if she even knew how to read one. The girl's answer must have been satisfactory, because the woman's expression brightened immediately. She handed over a compact leather-bound booklet, explaining that its handheld size made it easy to carry. The first half contained detailed maps, and the back half was left blank for taking notes. Chihiro's eyes went wide with delight. She'd seen books just like this back on Earth. What a surprisingly advanced civilization this is, she thought with quiet wonder. She paid with coins, got her change back, and practically floated out of the store in triumph. She felt old enough. She was giddy. She had just completed a real, independent transaction using currency from another world. The moment deserved its own theme song, and she admitted she could practically hear one playing in her head. A memory surfaced as she walked, of how she'd earned this money in the first place. She had sold sweets to the knights, saving every coin she could. She recalled the massive, bearded face of her father reacting to her attempts to buy him something. He declared he didn't need a thing, then scooped her up in a warm, tearful hug and told her that as long as she was healthy, nothing else mattered. Back in the present, the shop ladies behind her cooed softly at how adorable she sounded when she talked. "That little lisp," one said with a grin. Chihiro winced internally. She was trying her best to speak with the precision of an adult, but her toddler body simply refused to cooperate. She had to be very careful not to bite her tongue every time she opened her mouth. No matter. She had a destination. Consulting her brand new map, she set off into the city with determined little steps. The commoner districts were rough going, cobblestones uneven and tiring to walk on with small feet. But once she crossed into the area closer to the castle walls, the paving changed entirely, smooth, flat, and far easier to navigate. The difference was immediately noticeable. She filed that observation away and pressed onward. Then, without warning, a collision. She stumbled and fell to the ground just outside a doorway. Standing over her was a child, older than she appeared, with dark hair and sharp, steady eyes. The child wore simple work clothes and looked down at her with quiet concern, asking if she was all right. She dusted herself off and assured the other child she was fine. When asked where she was going alone, and where her parents were, she held up the map and stated plainly that she was on an errand. The dark-haired child studied the destination she pointed to, visibly surprised, and asked her why she was going there of all places. She puffed up and declared that she was going, full stop. No further explanation needed. A brief silence. Then the dark-haired child simply said, "I'll take you." A gruff market vendor called out to the dark-haired child, grumbling about a pumpkin sitting in the way. The child quietly crouched, wrapped it up, and tucked it under one arm without complaint. Then the two of them walked together through the streets, the tiny hooded girl beside her unexpected guide. When they finally arrived, the dark-haired child turned and said quietly, "This is it." And then, with the faintest shift in expression, "It's my home." The building before them was large, weathered, and wooden. A sign marked it clearly, an orphanage. Chihiro's eyes went wide. Inside, they were greeted by the orphanage's director, an older man with silver white hair and a neat mustache, carrying himself with quiet dignity. He introduced himself as Director Barbs and welcomed his unexpected young guest with gentle warmth, calling her quite the charming visitor. He asked how he might assist her. Chihiro drew herself up and introduced herself properly. She was Chihiro, daughter of Baron George. The reaction was immediate. Barbs blinked. The dark-haired child, who she now learned was called Zack, looked equally taken aback, hastily catching himself and apologizing for assuming she was the child of a wealthy merchant, noting that her clothing had given that impression. Chihiro calmly set the record straight. Her father's title was only granted for one generation, it would not pass to her. She wasn't truly nobility in the inheriting sense. Barbs, recovering gracefully, invited Zack to fetch some tea and settled in to hear what his curious young guest had come to say. Chihiro unwrapped a small cloth to reveal several coins and slid them across the table. She explained she had come to make a charitable donation on her father's behalf. Nobility had an obligation to support those in need, it was a moral duty, a failure of which could even be considered negligence. Her father, having grown up as a commoner, simply wouldn't have known about that obligation. So she had taken the initiative herself, using the money she'd carefully saved. This donation would become his achievement, she told herself with quiet satisfaction. Barbs was undone. His eyes grew wet as he pressed a hand to his face and thanked her trembling with gratitude. He confessed it had been years, since a noble had made any donation to this orphanage at all. Chihiro's expression shifted immediately. She straightened and asked with barely concealed disbelief whether the royal family or the nobility had simply not been visiting. Surely that was official business. She was outraged. Barbs waved his hands gently and explained. It was nothing so dramatic as negligence by the king himself, though clearly Chihiro had her own colorful thoughts about that. The real reason, he said carefully, was a long-standing disagreement with the church. In this kingdom, there were two orphanages. One run by the church, and this one, the independent facility Barbs oversaw. The split had happened more than 10 years ago. The church believed orphans should be raised to serve as priests and nuns. Barbs believed the children deserved the freedom to choose their own paths in life. The two sides had been unable to reach an agreement. What followed, Barbs explained, was quiet institutional erasure. The church had used its influence to ensure that all donations, all official visits, and all charitable attention was funneled exclusively to their orphanage. Children initially brought here were taken to the church's facility instead, the church keeping only those it deemed worthwhile, while those who didn't meet that standard were left behind at Barb's door. As for how they had survived all this time without support from the nobility or the crown, Barbs smiled softly. They grew vegetables in the field nearby. That was how they had gotten by. Right on cue, a small child from the orphanage appeared at the door, calling out for the director. Barbs acknowledged it warmly, explaining to his guests that this was how things worked. The townspeople brought what they had, and the orphanage made use of everything it received. He directed the child to take the vegetables to the kitchen. But Zack wasn't quite so calm about it. The moment he looked at what had been brought, wilted seedlings, tattered cast-off clothing, something in him snapped. He planted his feet and spoke with barely contained fury, insisting that the townspeople were treating the orphanage like a dumping ground for their unwanted scraps. This wasn't charity, he said with rising heat, it was condescension. As if they were just some forgotten children no one had wanted. Barbs let him finish. Then, quietly and firmly, he told Zack that wasn't for them to decide. Even wilted plants could still be eaten. Even worn-out clothes could still be worn. They needed everything they had, and they could use all of it. Then Zack's voice shifted. Still facing away, he spoke more quietly now, pointing out that Barbs was giving away his own share of food, working himself to exhaustion out in the field, and had been coughing more and more lately. He said, with a kind of helpless resentment, that none of this was the director's fault. It was all because of the church. And he was just a useless kind who could do nothing about it. Barbs gently corrected Zack, that wasn't true either. Zack worked incredibly hard, in the fields and looking after the younger children both. Zack began to apologize, embarrassed to have aired all of this in front of a noble's daughter. He thanked her again for the generous donation, it had been such a large amount, he said quietly. He should not have said all of that in front of someone like her. But Chihiro wasn't bothered by what she had heard. She was processing it. She simply said she had an idea. Something was turning over behind them with real intensity. Zack noticed it too. He found himself wondering why he felt the urge to trust this strange small person sitting in front of him. She was clearly a child. And yet, there was something smoldering in those light brown eyes that made him hesitate. He couldn't trust adults. He had learned that the hard way. But a child was a different question entirely. That internal tug-of-war broke when Barbs looked at Chihiro and said he was entrusting the matter to her. Chihiro's expression shifted into quiet, satisfied certainty. And just like that, her plan was in motion. The next scene found the two of them arriving at the castle gate. A guard spotted them and demanded to know who they were. Chihiro, unbothered, held up her identification, a decorative medallion bearing her full name, Chihiro LaGeorge. The guard's eyes went wide. They snapped to attention, announced they would immediately confirm her identity with the castle kitchen, and ushered the pair through with suddenly very formal energy. Inside the castle walls, Zack hesitated at the entrance to what was clearly a large, well-appointed manor. He stammered that he wasn't sure he should be here. Chihiro brushed his concern aside with breezy confidence, assuring him nobody would care, and led the way in. Inside, a butler greeted Chihiro and then looked at Zack with curiosity, asking who this might be. Chihiro introduced him cheerfully. This was Zack, she said, and he had helped her carry her shopping. Zack gave a formal bow, looking overwhelmed. The butler's expression flickered. He thanked Zack politely for looking after his young lady, then paused. His eyes narrowed slightly. Shopping? He turned to look at Chihiro and asked precisely where she had gone to do that. Chihiro, apparently immune to the weight of this question, spun around with a bright expression and moved right past it. The real impact came next. She had brought something from the castle kitchen, a large jar of genuine honey and a pot of something warm, which she now proudly presented to Zack in the kitchen area, explaining that she wanted to take these to the orphanage. Zack stared at the honey with wide eyes, genuinely stunned by both the quantity and quality of it. He asked, a little nervously, whether this was actually allowed. Chihiro declared that it was completely legal, everything here belonged to her, and then fixed him with a direct, sparkling look and asked if he would hear her idea. She laid it out simply and clearly. Her sweets had already been getting attention, word had spread after a recent incident, and it was only a matter of time before they spread further. She wanted to get ahead of that and build a proper plan. And here was the plan: the orphanage would become the manufacturer. She would supply the honey. The orphanage children would handle everything from baking to selling. The net profits would go back to the orphanage as their income. Her sweets would be branded as a specialty, the Little Helper Specialty Sweets. Zack stared at her. He admitted haltingly that if it were possible, it would be incredible. But then he asked if all the profit was going to the orphanage, what would she be getting out of it? Chihiro told him not to worry about that and kept going. The important thing, she explained, was that even if the church decided to say that nobody needed the orphanage, she needed them. Zack could only stare at her. With that, the terms were settled. Chihiro handed Zack a set of recipes to memorize, told him she would also speak to her father, and instructed him to come to the kitchen to practice making the sweets. She made it sound entirely routine. Zack however said with considerable uncertainty, he heard about his father, he is Baron and a palace chef, he's a celebrity. Whether it was really alright to borrow this man's kitchen, and have his daughter be the one teaching them all. Chihiro grinned and waved him off. Her dad didn't sweat the details either, she said. It was completely fine. Zack let out a quiet, slightly shell-shocked, I see. He then paused and thought since they had arrived at this mansion, what exactly had been happening. Zack's mind was still catching up. Replaying everything in his head, the way Chihiro had spoken at the orphanage, how she laid out the distribution plan. At the orphanage, she had seemed perfectly in line with what you'd expect from a noble's daughter. But then she'd called her father, Dad, in the most casual, unguarded way, a scam. No, he needs his feelings of admiration back. That internal crisis was cut short by the sound of heavy footsteps and a warm, booming voice calling out that he was home. Chihiro's whole demeanor changed instantly. She lit up and went pattering toward the door as fast as her little legs could carry her, throwing herself at Baron George with an enthusiastic greeting. The Baron, enormous, broad, and bearded, radiating warmth, scooped her up with a laugh and held her close. The sight was almost comically wholesome. And then he turned that massive, cheerful gaze toward Zack. Zack's internal commentary was immediate and helpless. That's the Baron. He looked nothing like what Zack had imagined. Standing before him was a man built like a friendly boulder, whose size alone made the room feel smaller. Baron George beckoned him over with one large hand, and Zack felt his heartbeat thud in his chest as he walked forward. He then introduced himself with as much composure as he could muster. The Baron simply patted Zack firmly on the head, a single, warm gesture, and told him he'd heard everything. He said Zack had done well. Then, still smiling, he added that Zack was welcome to come and learn the process here at the house with Chihiro. And he had one more piece of news. He would be meeting with the king's brother the following day to report on things. Zack stared, and then the emotion he had been keeping contained started to crack through. Tears welled up before he could stop them, and then overflowed entirely. Meanwhile, at the knight's headquarters, news had reached the prince that Baron George's daughter had safely returned to the family estate. Prince Romer had reacted with such relief that he practically collapsed on the spot, while his subordinate tried to get his attention. The scene shifted. A bright morning, the George estate, and Chihiro waving the orphanage children inside with boundless energy. The George kitchen became a classroom. Zack, Chihiro, and several orphanage children gathered around wide tables with mixing bowls, whisks, and rolling pins. And then, in the middle of a sampling session, Chihiro beamed and held one of the completed sweets out to Zack, who stared at it with wide, overwhelmed eyes, clearly deeply moved. Nearby, two orphanage girls dissolved into giggles. One of them nudged her companion and pointed out that from the back, Chihiro looked exactly like one of those tiny helpful elves you read about in fairy tales. Chihiro turned around and asked, with genuine innocence, if they had called for her. They told her, with poorly contained amusement, that no, they hadn't called her at all. The opening day of the Little Helper Specialty Sweets operation arrived. Zack and the orphanaged kids took to the streets with sample trays, calling out to passers-by. The reaction was immediate. People stopped, tasted, and their eyes lit up. One person demanded to know where they could actually buy more. Another could barely believe how sweet they were. The shop front at the orphanage building was already drawing a crowd. The menu was substantial: cookies, crepes, pound cakes, honey lemonade, and fruit-infused water. And hanging above the entrance, catching the light with quiet authority, was a plaque, the mark of supplier to the royal family. The crowd around it buzzed with disbelief. Sweets at an orphanage? Selling to the royal household? Chihiro, watching from nearby, said the approval of the royal family made it in time. Prince Romer had really gone above and beyond. He was an overachiever. But with that royal supplier mark, nothing bad would be permitted to happen to the orphanage. The approval from the royal family had come through just in time. She had planned for exactly that. Inside the stall, organized chaos reigned. The counter children were managing a 6 per person purchase limit, urging customers not to push. Customers were pushing anyway. Someone's foot got stepped on. Someone else tried to cut the line. The display table wobbled dangerously. Zack caught it, and then the gruff market vendor from before appeared in the stall's service window. The greengrocer who had once dismissed the orphanage children, who had once handed them a pumpkin and told them to get rid of it. He was here now, too. There was a moment of recognition, and then the greengrocer's wife appeared beside her husband, warm-faced, direct, and unashamed. She acknowledged that they had always been giving the orphanage their worst-looking vegetables, and that must have bothered Zack. She apologized on her husband's behalf for his unsociable manner. He was just built that way, she said simply, helping him carry fresh produce to the stall. Zack stared at them. He started to say it hadn't bothered him at all, but the sentence came out quietly, and his expression said something more complicated than his words. Then someone from inside shouted, "Sold out." The crowd groaned in protest. When would they restock? The demand was immediate and vocal. Chihiro, standing beside Zack and watching the scramble, looked pleased in a very calm, knowing sort of way. She told him she had anticipated exactly this kind of demand when she decided on the distribution structure. She pulled out her map booklet, the leather-bound one she had purchased on her very first solo outing, and held it open. She pointed to a spot on the map. The orphanage was marked there. And beside the marker, in the handwriting of whoever had made the map, was a small note: "Please spare a little bit of love for them." The person who had made this map, she explained, was from town. Seeing that note, that quiet little plea written into the city's geography by an ordinary townsperson, was what had led her to donate to the orphanage rather than the church. Zack looked at the note on the map. He said it slowly, trying to work through it. Even though the church had tried to make the orphanage disappear, even though it had been deliberately erased from official view, why had the townspeople still? Chihiro looked up at him with quiet certainty, her expression bright and completely sure of itself. She told him simply, "All of them. The townspeople, every one of them. They were loved." Zack thought back to all of it, the ugly vegetables, the seedlings, the worn-out clothing the townspeople had been leaving at the orphanage door for years. They could have sold those vegetables at a discount. They could have eaten them at home. But instead, without fanfare or expectation, they had given them to the orphanage. He had received so much genuine goodwill from people he had been silently resenting. He had told himself they were donating out of self-interest, or looking down on the orphanage. He had been angry at everything, consumed by their misfortune and his own bitterness, and he hadn't noticed any of it. Not a single gesture. What right had he even had to be that angry? He pressed his hands to his face, overwhelmed by the embarrassment of it all. The person who had opened his eyes to what had been right in front of him all along, was Chihiro. He wanted to repay her. Her and everyone else. No matter how many years it took. He had made his decision. He wanted to become a pastry chef. Chihiro's face split into a wide, delighted grin. She declared that a pâtissier sounded wonderful. The word, apparently, did not exist in this world's vocabulary. Zack blinked. Over at the orphanage stall, a tense exchange unfolded. A figure wearing the church's distinctive vestments approached and asked, in a pointed tone, whether the honey used in the sweets could be sold to them directly. The orphanage girl behind the counter answered politely but firmly. Their supplier had instructed them to refuse all such requests. The visitor humphed and retreated. Moments later, 2 more figures from the church arrived at the orphanage itself. A tall, older man in elaborate religious robes, introduced formally as Scarpus, director of the church orphanage, and his young attendant. Scarpus seated himself and delivered his opening position without preamble. The confectionery operation was beyond what a mere orphanage should be managing. The church would be taking it over. Director Barbs met his gaze and declined. This venture had been entrusted to him by a baron's daughter. He could not hand it over on his own authority. He also noted, with careful courtesy, that the recipes were not being concealed. Chihiro had said there was no need for secrecy, and he offered them freely. The man got angry. The recipes were essentially useless without a large, consistent supply of honey. He then tasted the tea and remarked it was awful. Why can't they bring out anything better? Zack, who had walked in on the latter part of this exchange, started to rise, a sharp response forming on his tongue. Barbs quietly told him to stand down. Scarpus narrowed his eyes and muttered that the situation was infuriating. He looked at the royal supplier mark and sat there, stewing over how an orphanage had somehow managed to secure a baron's daughter as a partner and achieve royal supplier status all at once. Scarpus concluded, privately, that the church had no choice but to approach the baron's daughter directly if they wanted any part of this. He left. The door of the George estate opened. Scarpus and his attendant stood on the front steps, and were greeted not by Chihiro, but by the household butler. Composed as ever, the butler relayed a message from the young lady of the house. The message, delivered in full formal register, was essentially, "Beat it, bozo." This concluded the communication. The door closed. Scarpus and his attendant stood on the steps in silence. Scarpus asked, with genuine bewilderment, what exactly a bozo was. The man said he had no idea. Neither of them had ever encountered the term before. Which, if anything, made it worse. Back at the church, Scarpus was reviewing the accounts and confronting a deeply unpleasant reality. Donations to the church orphanage had dropped significantly. Nobles who had recently come to buy sweets from Barb's orphanage had apparently, for the first time, become aware that there was a struggling orphanage just down the road. And once they knew it was there, they started donating to it directly. The flow of charitable giving that had always been steered toward the church was now being redirected to Barb's place instead. Scarpus sat with his ledgers and thought bitterly, if only they had the honey. They needed a confectionery business. The dignity of the church had to be restored. That night, darkness settled over the orphanage. The children were in their bunks when a loud crash shattered the quiet, something hitting the building with enough force to shake the walls, followed immediately by terrified screaming from the younger children. They cried out for the director, asking what was happening. 2 knights in gleaming armor appeared at the orphanage door. They had already captured the culprits. Chihiro had already requested the guards from Remor. She knew the church might try to do something like that. Scarpus was apparently dismissed and reassigned to a remote region. The next morning, Zack prepared the soup. The director of the orphanage watched with a warm smile as the children happily ate, their tables filled with food and laughter. Everyone was enjoying the moment. Overcome with emotion, the director's eyes filled with tears of joy. He knew it was all thanks to Chero. Meanwhile, Romer stood before the king, his expression tense. With a steady voice, he spoke. Regarding Chero L.A. George. I have a report to make. After Romer delivers the news to the king, he looks shocked. Something like this, happening to a child of the royal bloodline? It couldn't be. He asks, just whose child is she? Romer admits the father will likely not come forward. As he said, they tried to kill her in secret. Chihiro's hair is not ordinary blonde. It gleams with a rare, light platinum radiance, the exact same shade as the legendary first king of Frontier. In this world, hair like hers is more than beauty. It is a sign, a mark of something called the gleam, a trait so significant that those born with it rise to positions of power, and nobles who carry it are drawn into the royal family through marriage. For generations, the royal bloodline has carefully preserved this gleam, weaving it through their lineage to sustain the kingdom's magical foundation and produce, once every few centuries, a golden sovereign. In other words, the gleam reigns supreme. Therefore, if a child with even fairer hair than His Majesty has been born, and his brother may have the gleam, but it is a dark golden color, so if that child gains support, there is a chance the kingdom could be divided due to family turmoil. The prince understands why parents who fear that would abandon her. Prince Remor has barely concealed the fact that she is the golden sovereign. Luckily, her eyes still a light brown. When she awakens as the golden sovereign, she will likely lose her freedom. The king states flatly that the royal family must take the child under their protection immediately. He tells Romer to make the arrangements. But Romer does not move. Instead, he says simply, he cannot do that. The room stiffens. The reason, Romer explains, is already written in law. Chihiro has been officially, legally adopted as the daughter of a man named Baron George. The Baron, knowing nothing of the Gleam, had approached a civil official some time ago expressing his wish to take in a child from a distant branch of his family. Adoption had been quietly recommended to him. The paperwork is complete, filed in good faith, and signed without a shred of malice. A king may rule nations, but even a king cannot simply dismiss the law. That document is Chihiro's shield, and it is very much in effect. The dark-haired young man, Dakin, son of the Prime Minister, erupts. He demands to know if adopting a child of the royal bloodline without royal consent doesn't constitute outright treason. Romer studies him for a moment. This, it seems, is Dakin, someone who has been growing close to His Majesty of late. And he is not pleased. The king suggests what if he adopts her instead. Romer shakes his head. Baron George is, by all accounts, completely devoted to his daughter. He will never willingly give her up. The king says he does not believe that gaining support would make the proposal a bad one, so why Remer continues to insist that he will refuse it. Remer, meanwhile, finds his thoughts drifting to the image of them as a family, convincing himself that they would never understand. Dakin has had enough. Enough of this, he suddenly shouts. His voice cuts through the room. Not that, not this, and that so-called baron is guilty of insolence as well. As nobles of this kingdom, should we not accept the king's will with pleasure? Remer immediately counters, his tone sharp. Accept it with pleasure? Then why do they have laws? They exist to protect their people from being treated unreasonably. What is the purpose of status and rank if they do not protect those beneath them? If that is the case, then being royalty or nobility means nothing. The prince snaps, anger flashing in his eyes. Shame on you. The king falls silent for a moment, deep in thought. Then, to everyone's surprise, he nods. He agrees with his brother. How shall they proceed? They must protect her. A brief pause follows. Then the prince says he has a proposal. What if the king and queen assumed a formal guardianship, not as her parents, but as godparents? Dakin scoffs immediately. Godparents? What kind of obscure arrangement is that? Romer explains with quiet precision. Under this structure, Chihiro would remain exactly where she is, living with Baron George, loved and cared for. But the authority of the crown would extend over her like a protective canopy. The godparents would bear all the responsibilities of a parent, with no additional rights granted in return. It is entirely one-sided, and that, Romer implies, is exactly what makes it acceptable. A child of royal blood protected. A family left intact. The law respected on all sides. The king nods slowly. It is, he admits, not a bad idea at all. Dakin, refusing to relent, presses harder. He insists he is only concerned for His Majesty's well-being and begs for reconsideration. He argues that as nobles of the kingdom, surely everyone in this room should be delighted to carry out the king's will without resistance. Romer looks at him evenly and says 3 words, "Stand down, Dakin." Then he asks, calmly, almost gently, since Dakin himself has just argued that nobles ought to accept the king's will with pleasure, shouldn't Dakin be doing exactly that right now? The silence that follows is complete. Dakin's own words hang in the air and land squarely on top of him. He can only stammer. Romer watches, and privately concludes that Dakin is considerably less sharp than anticipated. That will not do. The palace is full of people far more cunning than this young man, and compared to a certain golden-haired toddler, he doesn't even register as a challenge. Romer allows himself a flicker of private amusement at the thought. Why, he wonders, is he comparing a grown man to a small child? And yet, somehow, the child wins. As the meeting winds down, Romer asks permission to continue his investigation into Chihiro's situation. There are more things he must report. The answer is yes. He is determined to protect her way of life. The news is brought to Baron George's home, who scoops Chihiro up in both arms with enough force to knock the air from the room, squeezing her tight and repeating, "Thank goodness, Chihiro stays as his daughter." Chihiro, squished against his chest, blinks up in total bewilderment. Baron George, undeterred and apparently operating on pure parental emotion, declares that Chihiro will stay with him forever, that he will never let her go, and that she never has to get married either. Chihiro thinks, isn't kind of going a bit far? Once the moment settles, Romer leans forward and delivers one final note of business. At a later date, there will be a formal audience. Chihiro will meet the king and queen in person. A contract will be drawn up. He asks them to do their best. The words hit Chihiro like cold water. An audience. With the king and queen. Then Romer adds, almost as an afterthought, that there is no limit to how many people can become a godparent. And since he, too, will be taking on that role from this day forward, he smiles, warm and unhurried, she is welcome to start calling him Fasher. The room erupts. Both Baron George and Chihiro freeze at the exact same moment, wearing identical blank expressions, hollow eyes, mouths open. Romer observes them side by side and notes, privately, that despite sharing no blood whatsoever, the two of them are uncannily alike. Meanwhile, Chihiro's small mind is still working hard to catch up. Romer is going to become her parent. He said she could call him Fasher. She barely gets through the thought before Baron George erupts like a volcano of paternal feeling, demanding, loudly, with maximum energy, that Chihiro call him Fasher, too, right now, immediately. She looks horrified and says she will not. Romer, calm and composed as ever, tells the room he will be returning to the palace. He steps toward Chihiro and, with an expression somewhere between patient and gently pointed, tells her that he trusts she understands her situation well enough. He adds one final observation, that while she is careful with information, once she decides to act, she becomes the complete opposite of careful. Brash, one might say. Chihiro takes the word like a minor collision, brash. The opposite of careful is careless, but the opposite of careful when you choose to move, is that just her personality? She looks mortified for exactly 1 second before realizing, yes. Yes it is. Now there are two things about it. She has always been like this since she was a child. Even if she understands the danger of a different world, she will blow it all off and even end up going for it. In other words, it is her personality. An audience with godparents and Romer also becoming her godparent, she needs to process this information. Outside, the prince tells Baron he must worry as well over that little tomboy. He laughs and says, well, worrying is a parent's job, but he thinks she will be all right. The prince smiles, thinking to himself, so the rest is up to him now. It is true that Chihiro is no ordinary child and she always comes back with something when she goes out. To begin with, the Golden Sovereign, is there meaning to that or a mere coincidence? It is a superior existence connected to the principles of this world. She should not be limited by the royal family of a single country, but she is still a child who is only 2 or 3 years old. He is hesitant, the interest of their nation comes first. They absolutely cannot allow the Golden Sovereign to be lost. Therefore, guards are a given. Right now, to respect her feelings and freedom, the fact that he has guards on her and the details about the Golden Sovereign have yet to be conveyed. But if her position is clarified with this audience, will things change again? He prays that the situation will continue to stay under control. The day of the audience arrives. In the George household, Sasha Companion has clearly pulled out every trick she knows. She stands beaming, brush in hand, declaring that she gave this her absolute best effort. The butler, standing nearby with quiet dignity, looks at the result and simply says the young lady looks wonderful. Baron George opens the door, and stops cold. Chihiro turns to face him, dressed in a soft, elegant outfit with ribbons and ruffles, her platinum hair swept up and tied with a large bow, her wide eyes bright and questioning. She asks, very earnestly, whether she looks cute. Baron George does not answer. He hits the floor. He picks himself up with speed, declaring that she is beyond cute, she is a fairy, she is an angel, and the word cute doesn't come close to covering it. Chihiro's eyes sparkle. She says he looks amazing too, all dressed up in his formal noble's coat. He looks just like a real noble. She says this with complete sincerity. The butler murmurs quietly to himself that the Baron is, in fact, a real noble. Baron George, for his part, flushes completely and stammers something delighted and embarrassed. It is a lot for one man to handle this early in the morning. The household steward prompts them, it is time to leave. Baron George makes a face like a man walking towards something he would strongly prefer to avoid, grumbling that he really does not want to go to the palace. The group departs, and the grand facade of the royal palace rises before them through the morning light, enormous and gleaming, all towers and carved stone and perfectly maintained gardens behind iron gates. Inside the palace, the throne room is vast and full. Courtiers and nobles line the hall in their finest attire, murmuring and craning their necks as Baron George enters with Chihiro tucked carefully in his arms. The reaction ripples through the crowd the moment they see her. Voices rise. Someone says her gleam is spectacular. Someone else recognizes it immediately, platinum blonde, the same rare shade as the legendary founding king, suffered. She looks like a little angel, whispers another. Chihiro processes all of this from inside Baron George's arms with the blank, slightly overwhelmed expression, so this is how pandas and koalas feel. At the far end of the hall, on the throne, sit the king and queen. Romer is already present, stationed to the side. Chihiro sees him and notes his presence with the private thought that yes, he really is here too. The king speaks first, gesturing for them to approach and telling them there is no need for formality. Baron George takes a breath and steps forward. Chihiro's eyes move to the throne, to the two people seated there. The king. The queen. Her internal voice is very quiet in that moment. Those are the parents who abandoned her. But she does not have time to sit inside that feeling, because Baron George is here and he is handling himself beautifully, greeting the king with warmth and exactly the right level of noble deference. Chihiro watches him with genuine admiration. Dad is actually doing a great job, she thinks. He really is a noble, huh? And now it is her turn. She has prepared for this. She reminds herself, intensive etiquette lessons, given by instructors who said she was excellent. She has done the curtsy in front of Romer before. She can do this. Noble mode, on. She steps forward, gathers her skirts with both tiny hands, and executes the curtsy. The room releases a collective gasp of appreciation. Someone calls it elegant. Someone else cries out that it is the finest curtsy they have ever seen from someone her age. Romer, to the side, goes very still, and then his shoulders begin to shake. He is silently losing his composure. Chihiro straightens up, takes a breath, and delivers her introduction. She announces herself as the daughter of Baron George. She wishes them a pleasant meeting. And in her nervousness, in the full, glittering splendor of the royal throne room with its hundreds of watching eyes, she lisps. Completely. The word, daughter, comes out with a toddler's pronunciation, and the greeting lands with the cheerful, stumbling sincerity of a very small child who has done her very best and is aware something went slightly wrong. She was so nervous she lisped enormously and she knows it. Baron George is trembling from head to toe, beard shaking, clearly holding back something massive with every fiber of his being. Romer's shoulders are still going. Chihiro thinks several things very quickly and settles on, at least just laugh openly, honestly, everyone in the room who wants to laugh should just do it. They do not laugh. They melt. The queen speaks first, gentle and warm, calling it an impressive speech for one so young. The king tells him he has a fine child. He agrees with the queen entirely. Baron George simply responds that she is the angel of his household. Standing before the throne, looking up at the king and queen for the very first time with proper eyes, her mind quietly supplies a piece of information she had been carefully not thinking about. It has been 3 months. 3 months since the people seated on those thrones abandoned her. She wonders, looking at their composed and gentle expressions, whether they have simply forgotten she exists. She wonders why they are looking at her as though this is the first time they have ever seen her face. Her small hand tightens into a fist in the fabric of her dress. And then she thinks, well, she has only ever met them once a month at most, even in passing. So perhaps that is simply the truth of it. But the realization that follows is quieter and far more devastating. She was a child so unwanted that they threw her away. She thinks, how sad that child was. She has pushed it back before with anger, but she did not realize she knows Fatima's sadness after all. What happened to her? It was dark and scary, the stone floor and the room were cold. The hunger, and crawling around the room getting filthy, lonely, sad and scared, but she couldn't cry. Back in the present, Baron George notices. He says her name, quietly at first. Romer, standing nearby, goes very still. And then tears, slow, quiet, and completely uncontrolled, begin rolling down Chihiro's face. While she stands in the middle of the royal throne room looking up at the people who left her behind, she suddenly jumps in her father's arms and cries out she wants to go home. Baron George's entire enormous frame vibrates. He is not a complicated man when it comes to his daughter. Chihiro is crying, and that means the world has made an error that must be corrected immediately. He apologizes to the king, loudly, and with zero ceremony, announces that the paperwork is apparently already sorted, grabs Chihiro, and leaves at a speed that leaves the entire court in stunned silence. Romer watches them go. The king mumbles to the heir that she can go ahead. The documents were indeed already arranged. He wishes them well. He says quietly that she must have been overwhelmed, that this was simply too much for her. Romer, watching the door where they disappeared, says only that she is in good hands. He turns the words over privately. No, she is not the timid sort of child who collapses from nerves. He knows that. He says there is no need to worry, since the Baron is with her. And then, just barely, a small sound escapes him, because the last thing he saw before she was swept out of the room was a lisping toddler in full formal dress absolutely losing her composure in front of the crown. And then Romer allows himself a moment of quiet observation. The formal audience has accomplished something important. The parents who abandoned Chihiro now have no room to act against her, not openly, not legally. More than that, Chihiro has been formally recognized before the court as the king's child. Her safety is more secure than it has ever been. The walls around her are higher. The pieces are in place. Back at the George household, Baron George comes through the door at full speed, calling out names in every direction. Naya. Sasha. Draw a bath. Bring sweets. Tea. Fruit water. All of it, right now. Sasha and the steward Naya appear immediately, both of them taking one look at Chihiro's tear-streaked face and visibly vibrating with the combined energy of concern and barely contained outrage. Who dared make their young lady cry? What happened? How did this happen when the master was right there? Baron George, who does not actually know the answer, says simply that he doesn't know either. Sasha takes Chihiro to the bath, speaking softly the whole way. She holds the little girl close against the warm water and tells her, she understands. She knows. And if Chihiro hates the castle, then she simply never has to go back. Everything is all right. Sasha is here. Naya is here too. And neither of them will ever let anyone make her cry like this again. Then Sasha says something that undoes the last of Chihiro's composure entirely. She tells her that she is a good girl, that she is allowed to cry, and laugh, and be angry, and that she never has to hold any of it back. That Sasha loves her exactly as she is. Adorable no matter what she feels. Chihiro cries. Properly, fully, without restraint or dignity or noble composure. She cries with her whole small body in the warm water, shouting that she hates the castle, that it is sad and painful, while Sasha holds her and the steam rises around them both. It is the most honest she has been since arriving in this world. She cries until she cannot anymore. Then she sleeps, right there in Sasha's arms beside the bath, face soft and finally peaceful. Sasha reports that she cried herself to sleep, and that she kept saying she hated the castle. Baron George looks like he has been struck somewhere very important. He asks what could have made her cry like that. Then the thought hits him. He wonders, loudly, with escalating horror, if it was his fault. If she could possibly hate him now because he was the one who brought her there. He attempts to go apologize. The steward grabs him by the collar. She is sleeping. It can wait until morning. Baron George does not agree with this plan at all and makes his feelings on the matter very clear, but is physically prevented from acting on them. Meanwhile Chihiro dreams. In her dream, a large fluffy bear wraps her like a shield against the world, and she curls into it without fear. She is still lisping, even in the dream, mumbling, "Dad," in a sleep-soft voice that trails off into silence. The next morning, she apologizes softly. She thinks she really messed up right in front of the king on top of that, but her father assures her it is fine. The castle? No, if she dislikes it, she doesn't even have to go to the kitchen again. He then admits it was his fault. He now realizes he took her somewhere painful. Her hand flies to her mouth as she lowers her face, overwhelmed. At once, panic spreads among them again. She opens the chapter with an apology for not being as happy. But out in the city streets, life is buzzing. Two workers gossiping over their brooms and window buckets stop to talk about the royal proclamation that's been spreading through the kingdom. Apparently, Baron George's daughter has made quite the impression on the palace. Word is she possesses something called the Gleam, and as a result, she's now under His Majesty's personal protection. In the warm bustle of a nearby bakery, two women chatter while pulling fresh loaves from the oven. Wasn't she the one, they ask each other, who took down that church official who had been tormenting the orphanage for years? In one fell swoop, apparently. The satisfaction in their voices says everything. Out in the market and along the cobblestone lanes, more people are talking. Workers pause their labor, market women set down their baskets. Even though she's just a child, they call her their little helper. Her name, Someone thinks aloud, is Chihiro. The sweets sold at the orphanage, the small acts of kindness woven through everyday life, people are tracing all of it back to her. Someone mentions they've heard she's fallen ill. That she hasn't eaten in several days. At a stately manor house, Chihiro's home, visitors have been arriving all day. 2 palace chefs stand at the entrance holding a carefully prepared dish. They tell the butler that the kitchen feels terribly empty without her, and they've made something they truly hope she'll enjoy. Close behind them come knights bearing gifts, noting quietly that sweets would probably suit her better than flowers. A mountain of wrapped gifts from the Duke and Viscount has piled up. Servants relay messages from their worried masters. Naya stands quietly absorbing every word, his expression somber. Then comes a knock at the door. He opens it, and a familiar face appears, a young man carrying gifts. "So you came," he says simply, with the faintest trace of relief. The young man is Zack, who is carrying a wicker basket with unusual care. He's heard that Chihiro hasn't been eating. So he brought something from his own fields, the season's first plums, just harvested. The tangy sweetness, he explains, is really something special, and knowing what a food lover she is, he thought they might coax a smile out of her. The butler accepts them with genuine gratitude. But Zack isn't done. He produces more from the basket, bread, fruit, a container of soup, explaining that these were collected from townspeople. Everyone in town knows what Chihiro did. And everyone is grateful. That's when it hits the butler. He notes all the gifts and then closes his eyes. "Our young lady," he says softly, "everyone is worrying about her so much." Zack looks down for a moment before stuttering over his words. Someone then asks if there is somebody here. The butler says it is gifts from the orphanage and the townsfolk. Romer is in the room with his knights as he notes the orphanage. Naya asks if Zack heard of the proclamation. Zack says he did not understand it. Chihiro is who she is, even if gold hair makes her a royal. Naya says they have yet to test this out. Which confuses Zack. Back at the manor, Zack approaches Chihiro's bedroom door alone. He knocks gently and calls for her. A maid named Sasha receives the quiet instruction from the other side of the door, and it swings open. The room is dim, the curtains half drawn. And there she is, Chihiro, lying beneath the blankets, her blonde hair fanned out across the pillow, her large eyes half open and glassy. Zack's composure cracks the instant he sees her. He says loudly that she was perfectly fine just a few days ago. Why is she like this? Sasha hushes him urgently. From the bed, Chihiro's voice is soft and a little distant. "She can't eat," she says. "And when she tries, nothing stays down." Zack asks why, and she stares at the ceiling. How can she explain? She keeps the real answer to herself. She knows what this is. She's known from the start. It's autotoxemia, a condition tied not to physical illness but to deep psychological distress. 5 days have passed since her audience at the palace. 5 days of high fevers, of her body rejecting food no matter what, of quietly growing weaker. And the cause? The castle itself isn't the problem. She corrects herself in her own thoughts, it's not the building. It's the people inside it. The king and the queen. The moment their image surfaces in her mind, her body seizes with nausea all over again. Sasha rushes to her side. Chihiro manages a quiet, fragile, "I'm okay." She notes how she can see the palace if the curtains are opened. She cannot forget since she lives so close, and it hurts to remember. If she told the truth, her dad will quit and run away with her. But then the darker questions follow. Would they be hunted down? Now that she's been officially recognized as the king's child, would running away even be permitted? And what about the people she loves, her father, Naya, Sasha, would they be punished in her place? She can't risk it. So she closes her eyes, breathes through the pain, and tells herself she just has to endure. She cannot go along with that conclusion. The household has been making a kind of improvised rehydration drink, honeyed fruit water mixed with a pinch of salt, and feeding it to her spoonful by spoonful. She once came dangerously close to dying from dehydration before. She's managed to get a little water down this time, but she hasn't eaten anything real in days. She had tried so hard to love, so how could it end up like this? If only she hadn't 4 bag. She wonders to herself if this is it. That's when Zack appears at her bedside. He moves near her quietly. He tells her plainly that he hasn't been able to do anything for her yet, that he feels useless, and asks if there's anything at all, he can do. Chihiro's eyes drift away from him, and after a long pause, a single word floats out from beneath the blankets. Something. Udon. Is that she says? Zack blinks. She says it again, a little more clearly this time, she wants udon. That's what she always craves when she's sick, she explains quietly. Soft and mushy, with scrambled eggs stirred through it. Zack doesn't hesitate for a second. He demands she tell him how to make it. She begins walking him through the recipe in a soft, half-dreaming voice: flour, salt water, kneading until it's smooth and yielding, cutting it into strips, boiling it long and slow in soup until nice and mushy. She then dozes off completely. The door clicks open. Zack steps out to find Sasha, who had been waiting in the hallway. She asks if he caught all of that. He confirms it with a single word. She asks if he can actually make it. And with some certainty, he says, he's going to try. Naya asks if Zack got to see her, to which he says yes. The moment Zack delivers the report, the reaction is immediate and electric. Everyone is surprised he got to meet with her and how she wants udon. Zack asks to borrow some ingredients and the kitchen. There's just one complication. Naya admits they've never heard of udon and does not know if they can make it. Zack concedes he's not entirely certain how to make it either, but he overheard Chihiro's instructions, and he's going to do his best. That's when another figure steps forward from among the assembled group, who introduces himself as Adulis, an apprentice from the castle kitchen. He asks if he can help. Zack says he was entrusted with this task. He will save her because he has to. Romer stares ahead and notes how this kid has got no connections but got to meet Chihiro. It seems like the head chef is okay with this. Everyone has tried to help but she kept throwing up, says Adulis. He did not think someone could see her and hear what she wanted to eat. Romer notes how that is Zack. Adulis says the head chef will have tears of relief if this works out. Zack stands before the ingredients laid out in front of him: flour, a glass of water, salt. He takes a breath and gets to work. Salt water into the flour first, mixing until it crumbles apart in his hands, then kneading, working the dough over and over, pressing and folding until it gets soft. He grits his teeth and puts his whole body into it, sweat breaking out on his forehead. It's harder than it looks. He wants to make sure to knead very well until soft, really soft. More sweat breaks out as he puts his all into it. His hand then starts to tremble as he comes to a stop. The dough stiffens under his hands and his strength is giving out. He notes how he's not strong enough and wonders why he is still just a kid. He's not strong enough. The thought eats at him. And then he catches himself wondering if he should just swallow his pride and ask Adulis for help after all, even though he turned down the offer earlier. That would be embarrassing. Adulis steps up beside him before he even finishes the thought, wearing an easy smile. Zack is startled. Adulis asks if he can help. The man has a firm smile as Zack nervously stares back at him. Zack then throws out an enthusiastic "please do." Adulis studies the dough, asking if this is some kind of pasta. Zack explains that there's no egg in it, no binding agent at all, so whatever it isn't pasta. But Chihiro said she wanted this soft and that this is important. Adulis throws himself into the dough saying he's got it and to leave it to him. He uses his full force to stretch the dough and work on it. Adulis notes how it's needed to be soft but that this dough is very tough. They take turns, Adulis working the dough while Zack steps in when he can, and then Adulis covers him when Zack's arms give out again. After the kneading is done, Adulis says it's gotten pretty hard and suggests resting the dough, as noodles do, for about 30 minutes. Zack agrees. When they come back to it, the difference is immediate. The dough has transformed, smooth, round, and beautifully soft. Someone questions if this is right. Adulis says it's really soft and it probably will work. Zack says she wanted to cut the dough into small strips and Adulis gets right to it. We see him chopping away and strips of dough being formed. The noodles are done. All that's left now, Zack announces with a grin, is to boil them in soup until they're soft and then stir in some scrambled eggs. Adulis pumps his fist in agreement. And then it hits. Adulis freezes, wide-eyed, as the realization crashes over him. He forgot to prepare the soup. Zack then gets the same realization as Adulis. The whole time they were kneading and resting the dough, he never even thought about it. If he'd started both at the same time, everything would have been ready together. He thinks of Chihiro lying in that bed. He can't keep making her wait. He messed up, and he knows it. Before he can spiral further, Adulis slaps a hand on his back with a warm, easy smile. Don't worry, he says, they'll finish it together. And that's enough to snap Zack out of his spiral. He looks up, steadied. Then Naya appears in the kitchen doorway, and he's holding something. A metal container. Zack recognizes it immediately, it's from the townspeople. Among all the gifts, there was a container of soup from the people of the town. Zack's breath catches. He rushes to bring it over to Adulis. Adulis lights up the moment he sees the soup. This will work perfectly, he says. Now they just need to boil it. Zack notes how he was saved by the townspeople once again. Naya holds his shoulder as the emotions start to run. He does not know if this is truly udon. But Mr. Adulis, Naya, and the townspeople put their all into it. Please be able to eat this. Finished then echoes through the manor. Zack carries the bowl himself, cradling it with both hands on a small tray. Sasha opens the door to Chihiro's room and lets him through. He crosses the dim space to her bedside and calls to her softly. My lady. The udon is ready. He asks her to please try to eat. Sasha gently helps Chihiro sit up. The little girl blinks, slowly at first, and then her gaze lands on the bowl placed before her. Her eyes go wide. It's real. A close panel of the bowl fills the page. Chihiro breathes it in. The smell is Western style, she notes distantly, but the noodles are right. Sasha lifts the first spoonful to her lips, cooling it gently with a soft breath. And then, very carefully, Chihiro opens her mouth and takes a bite. She chews slowly. Zack watches from just beside the bed, barely breathing, his hands clenched in his lap as Chihiro swallows. Tears start falling before she can stop them as she says this is really udon. This causes the other two in the room to get emotional as well. It's been boiled, mushy and mixed with eggs. She always ate this when sick. The soup is Western style here, but the noodles are real. They found it. They made it for her. She missed this. She starts to rub away her tears as Sasha covers her own emotions with her hand. She keeps eating. Sasha watches from beside her, eyes soft and glistening. Zack watches too, and when Chihiro finally looks up at him through the tears and says his name and thanks. He offers her a smile in return. Outside the door, people have crept close enough to hear. When the sound of Chihiro eating reaches them, Adulis peeks in through the cracked door, unable to help himself, and calls to Chihiro in the gentlest voice, asking if it's any good. He then fully opens the door to step into the room. She smiles back at him with a smile and says that it's good. Adulis looks at Chihiro and something sentimental crosses his face. He reflects quietly that it's only been a few months since she first appeared in their lives, and yet it already feels like a long time. She's really grown up, he thinks. She smiles back at him. The people outside also watch the scene from afar. She wonders why she had to be so dumb. There are so many people who care for her, so who cares about the king and queen? Nothing to be afraid of. The king may have done something she can't forgive. But she is not going to let that destroy her either. She wants to live. If the weight of the palace ever becomes truly unbearable, then she'll disappear on her own, without dragging anyone else down with her. The castle, she reasons, will simply return to what it was before she existed. It doesn't need her. But until that moment comes, she wants to be here. She notes how she will not forget about Fatima either and will help her ease the sadness a little. She has many stories to tell and hopes for the girl to wait for her. She then says she wants to eat more. As Drago is now at the door in tears. He hugs her warmly as she notes how she wants to be by everyone here at the castle. Some time has passed since the crisis, and Chihiro is back on her feet. This chapter opens with her marching up to the palace gate in a round little cloak and hood, cheerfully announcing to the armored guard that she has an errand to run and would like to go out. He tells her to wait repeatedly and pleads with her to cut him some slack. He mentions knowing that she's royalty but she's only 2 to 3 years old. He heard about this afterwards and was lucky to get away without punishment. He tells her she should please just leave the castle with an adult. Some people stare from the corner noting how they're glad this was resolved. Chihiro walks away and has a sulking look on her face. She thinks about how it'd be a pain to have a chaperone all the time and wonders what she should do. She's barely made it a few steps along the castle's flower-lined path when someone then notices her. The young man giggles to himself for a moment before then asking what is the matter with the young lady. He apologizes for not introducing himself sooner and states his name as Dorfin. Chihiro blinks up at him, and a flicker of recognition passes across her face. She thinks to herself, Ah, this is the one who helped her in the kitchen. She addresses him as Mr. Dorfin, to which he immediately softens and asks her to drop the formality. Just Dorfin, he says with a small, warm smile. And while this exchange is happening, somewhere nearby in a shadowed alcove, another figure is watching. One of them murmurs to the other that Dorfin has made contact. Chihiro says this is unbelievable and asks if this is allowed. She just wanted a chance to talk. Dorfin questions if she means to the forest. Chihiro explains her problem. The sweets she makes are going to run out of honey soon, and she wanted to go to someone named Melda to get more. But the gatekeeper stopped her from leaving alone. Romer could give permission, but she would feel terrible about always dragging the knights along on her errands when they're already so busy. Naya could take her as far as the orphanage, she muses, but the forest is probably off limits that way. She wonders what to do. He brings up the honey more specifically, for the sweets, right? That she received from the master of the forest. Chihiro confirms it simply, yes, in exchange for magic power. Melda said she could take as much as she liked. Dorfin's expression shifts. As he refers to her as the Golden Sovereign, Chihiro tilts her head and asks if he already knew that. He stares at her with astonishment. He wonders what happened on that first trip. He knew they were able to secure honey but did not realize they got it from the master of the forest herself. That's impossible, he thinks. For anyone except the Golden Sovereign. He then kneels down before Chihiro. His eyes go wide. The story passed down through his family, the ancient books his prominent marquis household had kept for generations, the ones he'd read and reread since childhood, dreaming of the day he might serve the legendary figure they described. That figure is standing right here. The Golden Sovereign, also known as the Radiant One, an entity born only once every several hundred years. He tells her he had no idea she was the Radiant One. He apologizes for his previous lack of courtesy. And then, with complete sincerity, he asks if it is her wish to head to the forest. Chihiro tells him she does want to. He confirms it without hesitation. He shall march even to death for her sake. She is taken aback by this. She mentions how the forest is dangerous but with Melda there it won't be. Her face immediately transforms into pure delight, sparkles in her eyes, both fists clenched, because she now has an adult chaperone. She thanks him brightly. He then asks to be pardoned as he grabs her. He notes what an honor this is and how adorable she is. He will serve her with everything he's got. The people watching over are stunned by what's transpiring. The guards at the gate barely have time to register what's happening before Dorfin, cloak flying, shoots through the gate on horseback with Chihiro. The loud clopping of the horse hooves on the road echo. Many wonder what in the world is happening. Someone shouts, should they shoot Dorfin down? Another immediately screams no, the Baron's daughter will fall too. A third scrambles to follow and report to the king's brother without delay. Dorfin and Chihiro are already thundering down the road. He grins into the wind and tells her it went perfectly, they can ride straight to the forest now. Chihiro, clinging on with both hands and very much aware that this is completely out of order. This is illegal, isn't it, she thinks. She waves the concern off with cheerful recklessness, she'll worry about that later. For now, the forest. Honey. That's all that matters. The trees arrive. The dark, ancient canopy of the forest comes into view, and they dismount at its edge. And the moment Chihiro steps toward the tree line, she lights up completely. Her hood falls back and she calls out into the forest, announcing her return with the greeting, Hiya Melda. He looks at her sideways and asks, what exactly is Hiya? Chihiro says it's just for fun. Then the forest responds. The buzzing begins. The bees emerge from the tree line in a dense group. Dorfin's throat goes dry. He says the words quietly, almost to himself, catastrophe-level monsters. These are catastrophe-level monsters. But Chihiro is already waving hello to one of them that has hovered near her. She laughs and tells him she missed it too. They then start to kind of swarm her. Dorfin steps forward to pull her back, warning the swarm sharply that Lady Chihiro is delicate and they had better not forget that. The bees swivel toward him in unified attention. Chihiro then notices Melda's arrival. We see the wind in the air start to shift. A large presence can be seen from the sky. The master then presents herself before the two characters. Her eyelashes slaying as per usual. She welcomes the sovereign and is happy that Chihiro is in good health. Chihiro says that she is, as Dorfin is taken aback by the sight of this specimen. Chihiro tells it plainly, she came for honey and asks if it wants magic power. The creature's enormous compound eyes seem to light up with delight. Yes please, it adds before she can even answer. Chihiro blinks and admits, quite simply, that she doesn't actually know how to release her magic power. How does one do that, exactly? Dorfin then recalls how she was yet to learn this. He then activates his own powers which whirl around the pair and near the bees. Chihiro says it is amazing, to which Dorfin says he has water affinity. Chihiro then notes how her heart is now pounding. She closes her eyes for a moment. Her powers then activate and spiral in a more untamed manner than that of Dorfin's. Light blooms from the earth itself, a single glowing point that tears through the canopy, before then bursting into many different pieces that scatter. These waves then move at light speed in large streams. The shockwave ripples across the tree line. The bees, catastrophe-level monsters, scatter and swirl in odd spirals, their round eyes shining. The whole forest seems to breathe in and hold it. The trees are now glistening with what appears to be golden power. Dorfin stares, struck speechless. Golden magic. He's read about it his entire life. He has never, until this moment, seen it. He says the words quietly, beautiful. Chihiro asks if that was good, to which Melda says that was more than enough. Dorfin is still in awe, asking internally whether it's even possible to cast magic without an incantation. Melda signals the swarm. The bees begin carrying honey, box after box. Melda presents it all formally, asking if this will be sufficient. Chihiro rushes to hug the supply and notes how a ton has been acquired. She smiles, noting how it's a bit too much and there's no way for her to carry this all back herself. Dorfin steps forward smoothly and says to leave it to him. Melda says she could have her kids do it, to which Dorfin says no and it would cause chaos in these streets. And then Melda presses the question, has Chihiro considered the full terms of their contract? And would she be willing to formalize it into a pact? Chihiro blinks. She admits, with complete sincerity, that she's looked into the Golden Sovereign situation and still doesn't fully understand it. Her father doesn't know anything about it either, and none of the books at home cover the topic. Then Melda shifts approach and asks whether Chihiro happens to like traveling and how the Sovereign must make a pilgrimage. Melda then starts to yap for ages again as Chihiro says she is a fast talker as always. Chihiro's eyes then light up. Travel? And local delicacies? As much as she wants. But again, she must postpone since there's too much to do. Melda droops noticeably, then Chihiro turns to Melda with a different request. Could Melda stop calling her Sovereign? It makes her uncomfortable. They're not really in a master and servant relationship, she explains, it's more of a mutually beneficial friendship. She gives her real name simply, Chihiro. Melda says understood, Chihiro. Something then catches our female lead's attention. She rushes over to Melda and yells Chihiro. The name. Say it again. She asks if Dorfin heard that, but he says only the Golden Sovereign can hear what the master says. Chihiro notes how this must be telepathy then and nothing to do with pronunciation. Yet she notes how this is the first time someone pronounced her name properly. Melda reminds her that she is very important to them and she can come to Melda anytime when she needs something. Chihiro thanks Melda and says she will come again. The ride back to the palace is peaceful. Dorfin works on correctly pronouncing her name the whole way, stumbling through it in pieces. Chihiro tries to correct him each time before finally saying that's right. He says it again, Lady Chihiro. His expression does something warm and resolved. Her eyes catch this. She starts to tear up once again and reiterates how she truly is surrounded by good people. The palace comes back into view. Grand and immovable against the sky. Inside, the reckoning is waiting. Chihiro and Dorfin are brought before the king's brother. A hard-faced knight with wild dark hair stands to one side. What's this guy's name again? Many knights stand around the pair. Our female lead says sorry. Romer tells Chihiro directly that he's glad she's safe, and that he dispatched a considerable number of knights after them, though none reached them in time. Then Romer's gaze shifts to Dorfin, and his voice drops into something considerably more serious. He addresses him by full name, Dorfin of House Kygris. And he asks whether Dorfin fully understands what he has done. Dorfin takes a knee without hesitation. He lays his sword before him. He acknowledges clearly that he violated his orders. He says the Golden Sovereign expressed a wish to visit the Master of the Forest, and he made that happen. Who in this world, he asks calmly, could possibly stand in the way of that? But he is a servant of the royal family. He says to punish him as fit. Romer studies him for a long moment. Then, quietly, he admires the determination. Romer asks if he'd risk his life for the child. Dorfin says without any regrets. Chihiro says this cannot be and tells them to stop. She asks Dorfin to go and please don't punish him. Romer says he is suitable and Dorfin of House Kygris is ordered to become the exclusive personal guard of Chihiro La George, daughter of Baron George. Do his beast in this. The pair are left stunned by this decision. He adds that he'd been considering assigning her a guard for some time anyway. And asks if they will accept. Chihiro processes this. Who? She thinks. Dorfin, beside her, accepts the order with a bright-eyed look and immediately addresses her by name, Lady Chihiro, declaring he will do his utmost best. And with that, the little helper has acquired a very reliable knight. Chihiro is still processing the whole situation as Dorfin is all smiles. Back at the Baron's manor, a rather significant letter has just been handed over, a returned invitation to a royal tea party. Accompanying this are quiet words of concern from a trusted advisor, a composed young man who carries himself with the weight of someone who has seen too much. He explains the situation carefully. Ever since Chihiro had her audience with the royal family, referred to here in this world as Chihiro, she had been bedridden. Unable to eat. Unable to move past what happened. The memories of nearly losing her life within the castle walls had carved deep wounds into her heart, the kind that don't show on the surface. An older nobleman, silver-bearded and dignified, listens with a teacup in hand. He recognizes this kind of suffering immediately. It is, he says, the same affliction that haunts soldiers when they return from war, men who carry the battlefield home in their minds long after the fighting ends. He is relieved she has physically recovered and found her way back to the kitchen. But for now, he advises keeping her away from anything that reminds her of the royal family. At least for the time being. The one who planned the cancelled tea party was none other than Queen Martida herself. Her intention had been warm, she simply wanted Chihiro, now officially a member of the royal family, to finally meet the other royal consorts and the children of the court. Someone who has heard about the little helper remarks that she sounds like a delightful and sharp child, and laments that they won't get to meet her after all. Meanwhile, life in the royal kitchen continues as usual, and the staff have their own gossip to chew on. A young chef named Adulis gets called out by a colleague who seems to know everything. It turns out Adulis had gone to some lengths, consulting with a civil official, no less, to try to become Chihiro's godparent, even though he's a commoner. For his trouble, the head chef had, let's say, expressed his strong disapproval, very physically. Adulis insists he wasn't beaten so much as strangled, which he seems to feel is an important distinction. The head chef himself, a mountain of a man with a great bushy beard and an apron that has clearly seen many battles of its own, looms at the center of the kitchen. He's still wrapping his head around the revelation. The little helper, their cheerful little helper, was royalty this whole time. But Chihiro herself had marched right back into the kitchen and declared that she wanted everything to be exactly the same as before. And somehow, everyone had just accepted that without too much fuss. And there she is, back in her spot, hood firmly in place, happily humming to herself with food on the mind. When a chef kindly suggests she take the hood off since it's getting in the way, she shakes her head without missing a beat. If anyone saw her golden hair, things would get strange very fast. The chefs exchange a glance and decide that's fair enough. The peace doesn't last long, though. A disturbance erupts near the kitchen entrance, a well-dressed young person demanding to be let through, brushing aside the guard with an imperious, "Don't you know who I am?" Chihiro peeks over, and there's something oddly familiar about the whole scene. Blocking her path is a boy, elegantly dressed, with short brown hair and sharp, serious eyes. He gets straight to the point. His mother had been hurt by the declined invitation, and he wants to know why Chihiro refused to come. Chihiro blinks. She doesn't know what he is talking about, she never heard anything about any invitation. It takes her only a moment to put it together. Her father must have turned it down on her behalf, worried about her well-being. She hadn't even known. But before she can process that, the boy's eyes narrow slightly. There's something he's noticed, the faint golden gleam in Chihiro's eyes, just barely visible beneath the hood. Just then Remer enters the kitchen with her dad and Harold and refers to the little boy as Prince. Asking him what he is doing here. The prince plainly says he's heard he has a new little sister, and he's come to find out why she won't come to the tea party. The realization hits Chihiro like a wave, those golden eyes. Golden eyes mean royalty, specifically, the first prince. She mentally crashes, staring up at this impossibly poised figure who is now looking at her with quiet curiosity. He introduces himself simply and warmly. He is the eldest son of the king, the queen's first child, Prince Wilf. He holds out a hand to Chihiro and tells her that he is her older brother and that it's nice to meet her. Then, before she can fully process any of this, he reaches out and pulls her hood back, revealing the full cascade of her shining golden hair. Wilf studies her for a moment, something genuine crossing his face. He tells her quietly that her hair is lovely, beautiful golden hair, fitting for his sister. He notices too that her eyes carry a similar golden warmth. And then he reaches out and actually touches her hair. Inside Chihiro's head, absolute chaos erupts. Who does that? Touching a girl's hair the very first time you meet her. She is furious, he can't get away with it just because he is handsome. She makes her displeasure known with blazing energy, demanding to know who exactly he thinks he is to call himself her brother. Wilf gives her a look of polite disbelief, pointing out that this is a rather rude response to a brother who came all this way to visit. Chihiro catches herself. Right. She is technically the king's child. Which does make Wilf, technically her brother. She still finds the whole thing deeply bothersome. The commotion gives Chihiro the window she needs. In a flash, she slips away. He starts looking for her but he's quickly reminded that he's wandering without an attendant, and then more seriously warned, the adults have already decided that Chihiro will not attend the tea party, and very soon the king himself will issue a command forbidding any contact with her. Wilf is shaken by this. He knows that none of what happened is Chihiro's fault and was wrong to say things that put the blame on her, even if the situation is frustrating. Chihiro didn't choose any of this. But when he thinks of her, that small, big-eyed girl who stared up at him from beneath her hood, all he can think is that she was a really, truly cute kid. Chihiro, meanwhile, has retreated to her sanctuary, a small hidden room she calls her secret base. It's gotten considerably cozier since she first found it, with pillows, a mat, snacks, and cups she's quietly borrowed from various places. She sinks into it with deep relief. This place is everything. She can come here when she wants to be alone. And sometimes, when she sits here, she remembers those first 10 days she spent in this little room. The beginning of everything. Several days pass. The scene shifts to a grand, sun-filled hall where a tea party is now in full swing. Queen Martida sits at the center of the gathering, a gracious and radiant presence, and in front of her are laid out the little helper's signature sweets, the confections that have apparently been causing quite a stir across the city. She declares them wonderfully sweet and delicious. Seated at the table are the first royal consort, Anastasia, and the second royal consort, Havlash. They are completely undone by what they're tasting. Anastasia presses a hand to her cheek in delight. The sweetness, she breathes, doesn't just pass, it lingers on the tongue. The texture is something else entirely. Compared to the modest spoonful of honey that occasionally graces their usual tea parties, these sweets are on another level entirely. Delicious beyond words. So wonderfully, impossibly sweet. Even in her absence, Chihiro's creations are making waves in all the right rooms. Picking up right where we left off, the royal tea party is in full swing, and Chihiro's sweets have caused something of a sensation. But it's first royal consort Anastasia who is truly losing her composure. She floats through the room in a state of pure ecstasy, barely able to contain herself. These confections exist right there in town, she marvels, and commoners have been eating them all along. She declares she must find out immediately who holds the rights to these sweets and pay them whatever they ask. She wants more, and she wants them now. Meanwhile, the queen watches quietly from the side. Even though Chihiro couldn't be there in person, she had quietly hoped that sharing these sweets, the ones she created, might somehow lift her spirits. Now that Chihiro is officially her daughter, she simply wants to find a gentler way to bring her close. The very next day, Chihiro is back in the kitchen, and then comes the sneeze. A mighty, full-body sneeze that rattles her whole frame. The chefs exchange a glance. Is she coming down with something? Chihiro waves it off, insisting she just feels a little chilly. But her expression says otherwise. Her instincts are right to worry, because moments later, the trouble arrives, a sharp, imperious voice demanding to be let through the kitchen entrance. The messenger, claiming to come on behalf of Lady Anastasia herself, is not taking no for an answer. And sure enough, a crowd of Anastasia's people bursts in, all speaking over one another. They've confirmed that the Baron's daughter holds the rights to the little helper's signature sweets. Lady Anastasia is overjoyed and the Queen herself would be honored to have her over for lunch. Will she attend? Please come at once. They all but push and shove in their excitement to deliver the message. Chihiro, absolutely done with this, mutters is there some rule at the palace that they have to come interrupt her meal time. She then calls out for her attendant Dorfin, and bolts. One moment she's there, the next she's simply gone, leaving the messengers scrambling in her wake. They pour into the corridor in a panic, shouting about where she went and what they'll possibly tell Anastasia if they return empty-handed. Back in her secret room, Chihiro collapses onto her little nest of pillows with a long exhale. How annoying. She's felt off since morning, she admits to herself. She'll just rest for a little while. This is definitely a high fever. The kitchen staff realize it first. Chihiro never came back. The head chef's eyes go wide, she didn't return. And within seconds he is moving, roaring that he'll search every corner of the castle. He orders someone to report to the king's brother, and the whole room breaks into urgent motion. Prince Remmer snaps to attention the moment he hears. He slams his hand on the table. What do they mean they can't find her? The head chef storms through the palace corridors, calling Chihiro's name at the absolute top of his lungs. In her little room, Chihiro can hear, barely, the distant sounds of people calling her name. Her thoughts are spinning in slow. She knows she's caught a cold, a bad one. The chills from earlier must have been the start of it. She is very, very cold, and the room won't stop tilting. Somehow, she manages to make a sound. Just small enough, just enough to carry through the walls. The head chef stops mid-stride. That was her voice. He and Wilf lock eyes, that was Chihiro, just now. They push toward the source together, calling her name louder and louder. Chihiro, bundled in her blankets and fighting to stay conscious, manages to answer, she's here, right here. The shout that comes back is so enormous it physically rattles her. She tells him flatly, with what little voice she has left, that he is way too loud. The door is found. But getting it open is another problem entirely. It's a narrow, half-hidden passage and the head chef is, to put it generously, not built for narrow things. He is stuck. Outside, something else is happening entirely. A low, ominous buzzing fills the air near the palace grounds. People in the street stop and stare upward, then scatter screaming, bees. Not ordinary bees, but massive, monstrous creatures of catastrophic scale, bearing down on the palace from the sky. The crowd panics, tripping over itself. Voices cry out that this is the end, that something has gone wrong with the royal family, that these things are heading straight for the palace. The queen bee reaches the palace and pulls her out of the narrow space. Her father cries out in relief, but the queen glares at them all. She starts to rumble, a low, dangerous vibration in her voice. She senses a disturbance unlike any before her magic wavers. What on earth have all of you been doing? However, other than the child, no one can hear the words of monsters and all of them look at her speechless. While she scolds them, what do they think they were doing hurtling together while the Golden Sovereign's life was being put in such danger? Of course, this was too much for her to ignore, so she came flying in. She cannot believe this. She writes it down aggressively, and then when they read it all, they are more shocked about the fact that she can write it. Even the king rushes in, having heard that the master of the forest has arrived. She glares at him, eyes sharp. So he is the current ruler of this country? She writes again, clearly and firmly, to begin with. She is the Golden Sovereign. The king's face drains of color. He calls to his brother, voice tight with tension. It appears. She is the Golden Sovereign. Would you care to explain that? Renner meets his gaze, stiff and tense. I understand, he admits. The story continues in the royal doctor's examination room. Chihiro is lying quietly on a bed. Her golden hair spreads across the pillow. The royal doctor examines her carefully. The head chef is standing at the doorway, very worried. He can barely stay calm. He asks if Chihiro will be alright. The doctor answers calmly. Chihiro's fever is gone now. She only needs rest, and she will recover. When he hears this, the head chef finally relaxes. In another nearby room, Queen Melda still has something important to say. Even though Chihiro is sleeping peacefully, the giant bee queen looks at the humans in front of her. She writes her message clearly in a language the humans can read. She says she cannot leave Chihiro's safety only to humans anymore. From now on, her bee children will stay at the castle to guard Lady Chihiro. Chihiro will also have a special personal attendant to watch her movements around the castle. This is not a suggestion. It is a decision that the king listens to Queen Melda without showing fear. Remmer however tense, wondering will it be seen as a monster invasion taking control of the palace? Or is it the start of cooperation between humans and forest creatures? However, the king calmly thanks Queen Melda. He says if Chihiro is truly the Golden Sovereign, then he welcomes this arrangement. Remmer stills. He believes this moment could become a turning point in the kingdom's history. Later, in a quiet meeting room, the king sits across from Prince Remmer. The king demands he knew she was the Golden Sovereign. Remmer admits yes. However, regarding her, he did inform him there were a few other things that he would report on and to wait until he investigated. The king snaps, but in these circumstances, it would be unthinkable to leave this unreported. However, the prince corrects one important misunderstanding. Chihiro may be a candidate for the Golden Sovereign, but she has not become one yet. He tells the king, twice now, she has given the queen her golden magic. The king's eyes widened in shock. The prince admits, it is unusual. That could be it, the king says slowly. The magicians of the magic tower reported that, recently, magic power levels across the entire country have increased slightly. That might be the cause. What might be the cause? It has been the topic of much speculation. The prince freezes, thoughts racing. Is this to be expected from a legendary entity, a support to the very source of magic for this world? How incredible, the king speaks again, firm and unwavering. It has been a few hundred years since the last Golden Sovereign. No matter what it takes, the pact must be formed. That is the truth, but he cannot force a child. He is not in a position to compel her either way. She is a higher existence than he is. All they can do is wait. He turns the matter over in his mind and instructs the prince to handle it properly. A king may rule a kingdom, but the Golden Sovereign rules over the world. Still, the prince hesitates. How can he tell a mere child that the fate of the kingdom and perhaps the world hangs in the balance? It is too heavy a burden. To do so now would be coercion. He knows he must tell her someday, but not yet. Being the Golden Sovereign means offering one's life for the sake of the pilgrimage. She would be separated from Baron George, her freedom would vanish. Why does he care so much about protecting her freedom? He wonders. It seems only logical that she should be free. Perfectly natural. Her being a child cannot fully explain it. Neither does granting her limited freedom suffice. She must be truly free. Even though such a thing does not exist for humans, everyone in the kitchen speaks of her as if she were an angel, a fairy. Does that make her want to believe it? Later, the story moves to the Baron's manor house. Inside a proper bed, Chihiro wakes up. She sits up with wide eyes after hearing everything that happened while she was unconscious. Queen Melda and several bees are already in her room, calmly staying there. Chihiro realizes there was no real way to refuse Melda's arrangement. Meanwhile, the chaos caused by the bees is still affecting the city. Knights froze in shock, citizens fainted in the streets, and the entire town panicked when catastrophe-level monsters arrived. The knight explains all of this to her and still seems shocked himself. The queen also lets her know she shall assign a child to stay with her exclusively. Is that acceptable? Chihiro asks Queen Melda and Romer a careful question. If she has a bee guard, will she still be allowed to leave the castle? Romer looks extremely uncomfortable. But then says if she takes Dorfin along, he will admit it. Romer admits that having a catastrophe-level monster bee as a personal guard is technically the best protection possible. Chihiro accepts this calmly and notices Romer is still very nervous about letting her leave. Next, they must choose which bee will guard her. Chihiro immediately asks for the smallest bee. Queen Melda brings forward a tiny fluffy bee with big round eyes. Chihiro completely loses her composure because the bee is so cute. She hugs the little bee happily. She decides to name the bee Pochi, the same name as her hamster in her previous life. Queen Melda explains the bee is female, so the name becomes Pachiko. The tiny bee shines with joy after receiving a name from her sovereign. Romer then gives formal apologies from the queen and the royal consort for the messenger incident that caused Chihiro's illness. He explains they did not understand the full situation at the time. Now a no-contact rule has been created to prevent it from happening again. Chihiro accepts the apology easily. Then she makes another request. She asks if the bees could help deliver things for her. She wants honey and sweets delivered to the orphanage and to the royal family. She even offers to share her sweets recipes with the royal consort as a goodwill gesture. Romer quietly comments that she is very generous. Several days pass. One sunny day, Chihiro leaves the Baron's manor. Dorfin is waiting outside, along with Pachiko. Chihiro reveals a strange invention. It is a wooden board with ropes attached, and several bees hold the ropes. This device will carry her in the air like a swing seat. Dorfin stares at it in disbelief. Chihiro gathers the bees and gives instructions. They must fly together and keep the board level. The bees excitedly fly up. Unfortunately, everything goes wrong. Because Chihiro's head is heavy for her small body, she flips upside down and ends up hanging tangled in the ropes high in the sky. Dorfin yells for them to come back. Dorfin gently explains that while he understands her idea, even cavalry trains before missions. They should practice first. They try again more carefully. This time the bees fly together properly. Chihiro rises smoothly into the sky, sitting on her board with Pachiko on her head. People in the city look up in shock. They see a person flying with bees. Chihiro spreads her arms and looks at the world below. She sees the city, fields, countryside, and ocean. For a moment she forgets all her responsibilities and simply enjoys the huge world. She lands near a small building beside a field. Zack sees her fall from the sky and is completely shocked. Chihiro greets him cheerfully and explains the flying board. She even invites him to try it. Zack immediately refuses because it looks terrifying. He thanks her for bringing extra honey. Then Zack tells her good news. The kingdom has officially announced that the forest master and the bees will protect honey sellers. The orphanage also received this notice. The bees are already guarding the honey shop, and the orphanage children quickly became friends with them. Adults are afraid of the bees, but children are not. The bees sitting at the shop have also scared away troublemakers, so business has become easier. Chihiro closes her eyes for a moment and says she is glad. Zack then notices something. Dorfin is not with her. Chihiro admits she came alone because Dorfin could not fly with the bees. Zack stares in shock. Soon Dorfin appears running in the distance, shouting for Lady Chihiro. Chihiro laughs and waves at him, saying she thought it would be fine. Zack watches happily. Her lady is smiling brightly again today, and that makes her satisfied. And just like that, another peaceful morning rolls in. At least, that's what our girl Chihiro was hoping for. With a cheerful grin and her little companion by her side, she declared today would be yet another wonderfully laid-back day in her slow, comfortable life. If only the universe agreed. Because no sooner had that thought left her mind than a loud crash shattered the calm. Chihiro crumpled to the ground in despair. Her beloved secret base had been sealed off. Her stash of sweets, gone. Her sanctuary, closed. According to her bee companion, it was the king's brother who gave the order, citing the danger of her getting trapped inside again. Chihiro could only mourn her lost hideout in silence, well, in dramatic, crumpled silence. But nearby, something else caught their attention. A large cloth was draped over a section of the castle wall, marked with a sign that clearly read, "Do not touch." Someone noted the handwriting on the wall beneath. It belonged to Queen Melda. Dorfin, composed as always, explained that scholars were preserving it for study, because the very idea that a monster could be literate had never once crossed anyone's mind before now. Chihiro, blinking at the wall with wide eyes, thought about it for a moment and quietly decided that if Melda was indeed a monster, then honestly, it made perfect sense. With that observation filed away, she squared her shoulders and resolved to get back to what mattered most, her slow life. And then a realization hit her like a ray of sunlight. She was, for all intents and purposes, free to leave the castle. Not completely unescorted, she could use the gate with her bee companion and Dorfin, but still, freedom. Chihiro lit up with a triumphant little pose. She pointed out that heading into the forest alone would be genuinely dangerous for Dorfin. Going together meant no unnecessary waiting. The bee companion agreed with a cheerful nod. Chihiro was more than happy to accept the arrangement. At the gate, one of the armored guards offered a warm send-off, wishing her well on her outing. Another, more formal guard reminded her to follow proper protocol while passing through. Chihiro thanked them with the kind of radiant sincerity that made it impossible to be annoyed with her, and then, they were off. Into the forest, on a mission. And this time, it wasn't honey they were after. Inside the forest, The other bees also came to meet her. A darker shape lurked in the underbrush, something that looked distinctly like a monster. But Dorfin kept his composure, calmly explaining that with the bees standing guard, it was unlikely to approach. Normally, he said, monsters attacked humans on sight, which was exactly why ordinary people steered well clear of these woods. Only adventurers on quests or knights on missions came here. The bee companion, spotting the creature, confirmed it was indeed a monster, but seemed satisfied that the situation was under control. Chihiro, moved by the bees' protection, offered them a sincere and quiet thank you. Then her eyes went wide. Chestnuts. Dozens of them, scattered across the forest floor like little spiky gifts from the earth. Chihiro nearly vibrated with excitement, marveling at the sheer abundance of them. She recalled that the last time she had come here, she'd found raspberries and silverberries, enough to make her wonder if this world's ecosystem wasn't so different from the one she'd left behind on Earth. And if raspberries existed here, then surely other familiar things did too. She immediately turned to Dorfin and asked for his help gathering as many as they could carry. Dorfin stared at the prickly shells with visible uncertainty, genuinely puzzled about how something so armored could possibly be edible. Chihiro stared right back. Had he really never eaten a chestnut? He admitted he hadn't even known you could. He did, however, know them by their other reputation, dangerous forest nuts that exploded when thrown into fire. A brief, chaotic mental image of unsuspecting campers being launched skyward seemed to drift through the scene. Chihiro acknowledged that yes, that tracked, given how they looked. She pointed to one that had already cracked open on its own, the smooth nut nestled inside, ready to eat. She picked it up, popped it into her mouth, and her expression melted into something approaching pure joy. Absolutely delicious. The bee companion, having apparently already run their own assessment, cheered in agreement. This was definitely the right one. Dorfin watched the whole thing with a slightly stunned look. Without further debate, the whole group got to work. Dorfin called for the tools Chihiro had apparently thought to request in advance, and soon everyone was pitching in, bees included, cracking shells, collecting nuts, and filling bags. By the end of it, Chihiro was practically dancing on the spot, beaming at the haul they'd managed to put together. Dorfin stood beside her holding a bulging sack, looking quietly pleased in his own reserved way. But the forest had more to offer. Pressing onward, they stumbled into something that made even the bees cry out in delight, a clearing absolutely blanketed in mushrooms. Fat, unpicked, pristine mushrooms in every direction. Chihiro's jaw dropped. A mushroom paradise. A smorgasbord of untouched forest fungi, just sitting there waiting. Dorfin admitted he had known these particular mushrooms were edible, but because they only grew deep in the forest, they were considered rare and seldom harvested. Chihiro cradled one in her hands with the reverence of someone holding treasure, her eyes practically sparkling. Delicious in all kinds of dishes, she breathed. And then she paused. Her expression shifted. The sparkle in her eyes hardened into something sharper, something serious. Because here was the thing about mushrooms, she declared, her voice taking on a gravity that surprised even Dorfin. Mushrooms, however innocent they looked, could be deadly. Toxic and edible varieties sometimes looked almost identical. Back on Earth, mushroom foraging had been a matter of life and death. They were going to sort through them. They were going to figure out which ones were safe to eat. Dorfin asked, with genuine concern, whether she could actually tell them apart. She thought that she had grown up in the countryside back on Earth and gone foraging regularly, so yes, she had some ability to distinguish safe mushrooms from dangerous ones. But, she added with a calm, unblinking expression, since this was an entirely different world from the one she knew, she had to be realistic. In the end, it came down to brute force. Dorfin did not look reassured. But Chihiro was already in motion, holding up a mushroom with the energy of someone about to conduct a science experiment. They were going to run a patch test. The method was simple: gather mushrooms that appeared edible, the ones that bore a resemblance to familiar Earth varieties, then apply a tiny amount to the skin and wait 15 minutes. A small note at the bottom of the panel quietly reminded anyone watching at home not to attempt this without access to healing magic. The slow life, it seemed, had once again found a way to become something a little more complicated, and a whole lot more interesting. Chihiro laid out the full procedure for the mushroom patch test. First, you rub a small amount against your lips and wait. Then you heat the mushroom, because most varieties really shouldn't be eaten raw, and hold a tiny piece in your mouth without swallowing, waiting another 15 minutes. If nothing happens after all that, you swallow and wait a full 8 hours before declaring it safe. It was methodical, careful, and a little bit nerve-wracking to watch in practice. Chihiro, being Chihiro, decided to run the test on herself. Dorfin's reaction was immediate, a sharp, alarmed protest that this was far too dangerous. But Chihiro calmly pointed out that because of her small size, the waiting period probably didn't need to be quite as long. Then, with a dramatic declaration that announced he would do the same, Dorfin stepped forward himself. Whatever reservations he'd voiced, he clearly wasn't about to let her bear the risk alone. The two of them sat together on the forest floor, Dorfin kneeling with the small bee companion nearby, as they went through the testing process side by side. And when the results came in, Chihiro cheered. All 3 varieties were safe. She wanted to take them home, and also the chestnuts were so sweet and crumbly. She is so happy. Dorfin watched her for a moment, just a moment, and something in his expression softened. He went very still. Completely frozen, actually. The bee companion noticed and nudged him with a curious little tap. Dorfin snapped back to himself, quickly looking away with faint color on his cheeks, muttering something barely audible about how utterly adorable that had been. Back at the castle, Chihiro marched straight into the royal kitchens. The kitchen was a lively, professional space, filled with cooks in tall white hats moving with practiced efficiency. At the front of the room stood the head chef, a big, broad-shouldered man with a full beard and an air of absolute authority over his domain. When Chihiro set a chestnut down in front of him and explained where it came from, he examined it with genuine curiosity. He'd never seen one before, he admitted, asking where she'd found it. "The forest," she said simply. "And of course it was," he replied, turning the nut over in his hand with the focused look of a man who was already thinking about what he could do with it. Chihiro's eyes lit up. She explained that while the shells were a bit of a challenge to peel, the nuts inside were wonderfully delicious, and she wanted to make sweets with them. The head chef didn't need convincing. He straightened up, looked at his crew, and declared that they were going to give it a try. And so the kitchen came to life with purpose. Chihiro directed the process with quiet precision, sorting the chestnuts into 2 groups. Some would be boiled down and sweetened, others would be ground into a smooth paste. From there, she walked the head chef through the construction of what could only be described as this world's first Mont Blanc. Slices of pound cake served as the base, then a layer of buttercream was piped on top, followed by sweetened chestnut paste squeezed over everything in elegant strands, crowned with a single glazed whole chestnut. The result was stunning, a perfect, glittering dessert that looked like it had been pulled from a high-end patisserie window. The kitchen went quiet for a moment when it was unveiled. Then the head chef exhaled a slow, impressed breath and declared it looked absolutely delicious. Chihiro was already grinning. But the cooking wasn't finished yet. Chihiro announced, with the decisive energy of someone who had been planning this since the forest, that she also wanted stew. The head chef blinked. "Stew? Another round?" The younger cook beside him looked equally startled. But neither of them argued for long. This was the little helper, after all. Butter and flour went into the pan first, sizzling gently as the roux came together. Meanwhile, another cook finished preparing the chicken while the mushrooms were readied on the side. Chihiro directed the process step by step: add the milk gradually, let the sauce thicken, then move everything into a large soup pot to simmer together. The mushrooms went in alongside the chicken. And then, with the air of someone revealing a great secret, she called for the final ingredient: cheese. A generous portion, stirred in until it melted completely into the rich, creamy broth. The result was a mushroom cream stew, and when it was finished, it was glorious. A wide, gleaming bowl of thick cream soup crowded with tender mushrooms and chicken, the kind of dish that made the whole room smell like warmth. The moment of tasting arrived and the kitchen's reaction said everything. The head chef's eyes went wide. The younger cooks exchanged stunned, delighted looks. Dorfin, who had somehow ended up at the table, ate with quiet, unmistakable appreciation, and then, without quite meaning to, found his body swaying slightly as he ate. He caught himself and offered the closest thing to a sheepish observation he was capable of, acknowledging that apparently when something tastes this good, the body just moves on its own. The cooks broke into warm, surprised laughter around him. One of the younger cooks, still marveling, looked at the head chef and quietly said what everyone was already thinking, that the chicken and mushrooms had an incredible springy texture, that the cheese brought everything together perfectly, and that this thick, hearty thing Chihiro called stew was unlike anything they had eaten before. The chestnut cream in the dessert, too, had a flavor entirely its own, richer and more complex than the custard creams they were used to. Chihiro, wrapped in her hood at the table, was practically vibrating with happiness. She told herself it was worth every moment of effort, the foraging, the patch testing, all of it, because it had led to this. Hot food, shared with people who appreciated it. Her heart felt as warm as the bowl in front of her. Meanwhile, behind her, a newly arrived cook who had apparently just started in the kitchen leaned toward the others with a slightly overwhelmed expression and asked the obvious question, was this tiny, impossibly serious child really the one responsible for all of this? And where had she even learned to cook like this? An older colleague turned to him with the weary wisdom of someone who had already been through this exact revelation and simply told him to listen carefully. The single most important thing he needed to understand about working in this kitchen was to get used to the little helper. The new cook started to push back. What did that even mean? But before he could finish the thought, the experienced cook cut him off with a warning. Don't ask her where she learned it, he said. Because the answer she gives is that God in heaven taught her. And if you push further and she decides her secret is out and she needs to leave, the head chef will personally end you. The newcomer snapped to attention immediately. Understood. The others nodded. In this kitchen, everything unusual was simply explained away with 4 words, she is the little helper. And that was enough. Chihiro, blissfully unaware of the small legend being reinforced around her, sat eating her stew and her Mont Blanc with complete contentment. In this other world, she thought quietly, the flavors that felt like home were slowly growing in number. More dishes she remembered. More sweets she loved. And when she sat down to eat them surrounded by people, her heart didn't just feel fed, it felt genuinely, peacefully warm. She would eat well today, and tomorrow she would work hard again. But not everyone was having such a comfortable evening. Somewhere else in the castle, the scene shifted, and the mood changed entirely. A young boy, small and curly-haired with wide, earnest eyes, stood in a grand room looking troubled. A woman nearby, seemingly a caretaker or attendant, asked him gently if he was talking about his imaginary friend again. The boy, identified as Prince Theodore, insisted firmly that she was real. That the girl had truly been there. His expression was not that of a child making something up, it was that of someone who had seen something and desperately needed to be believed. He asked, quietly and with a kind of longing that was hard to look at directly, where Fatima had gone. He wanted to see her. Whoever Fatima was, and whether she was imaginary or very real indeed, it was clear that Prince Theodore missed her deeply. And that question, hanging unanswered in the air, felt like the beginning of something much bigger than a mushroom stew. The scene opens with the prince looking for Baron George, but the Baron is nowhere to be found. Instead, he spots the small, hooded figure of Chihiro washing the dishes and apologizes for the interruption but presses on anyway, because what he has to say can't wait. It concerns her bees. And the transportation device she built from cloth. The mention of those things immediately conjures the image that shook him, a bright-haired girl floating through the sky with a large magical bee perched atop her head. Remmer exhales, admitting that when he witnessed it firsthand, he nearly lost his footing entirely. He'd managed to keep his composure in front of the staff, barely, but inside he had been utterly floored. He had believed it would be fine for her to move freely, with Dorfin and the bees by her side. But seeing that with his own eyes had changed things. He's sorry it came to this. He then presents her with a formal document. The rules have been revised, she can no longer come and go from the castle without restriction. Minimum guidelines are now in effect. Chihiro reads the familiar shape of it and something flickers at the back of her mind, a quiet sense of déjà vu pulled from memories of another life entirely. She accepts the document without complaint and is instructed to hand it to her guardian, Baron George, once she's home. Then, before she goes, she produces a small cloth bag tied with a ribbon. Her newest batch of cookies, and tells him to eat them whenever he gets a moment to rest. He looks at her, genuinely touched, and offers his quiet thanks. She steps out into the open air with Dorfin buzzing loyally beside her. It's a beautiful day. So peaceful. And she has been in good health lately. Every day is so much fun. She doesn't notice the small figure pressed against the window inside, wide-eyed, curly-haired, barely tall enough to see over the sill. But the moment that child spots the blonde-haired girl walking below, something inside him cracks open completely. He breathes Fatima and is off in an instant. He looked for her forever, over and over. Everyone said she wasn't real. He was so sad, he wondered if she was real and got scared, but he knew she definitely was. He missed her, his dear Fatima. When he approaches and asks her if she is Fatima, she looks taken aback and asks him who might he be. He quickly replies it's him, Theo. She immediately remembers he was called Prince Theodore or something. They said he was the second prince, a royal consort's son. She remembers meeting him before. She realizes his hair color is a little different, more of a deep gold like the king's. She pouts, thinking did not Romer say he had forbidden the royalty from interacting with her. She guesses he is so small it cannot be helped, but here he is. He then grabs her hand like he used to when he was a child, and his eyes tear up, realizing it is indeed not a dream. He starts sobbing and says she is real. Everyone said he was dreaming, but he knew it. She is real. But she quickly yanks her hand back, clutching it to her chest, looking at him, warily. He freezes and then asks in a small voice, if she really doesn't remember him. They sometimes played together when they were little. She knows he is around 3 years old, but he speaks so well. She supposes that is natural for royalty. She tenses, he knows her from when she was Fatima. What should she do? Just then, Dorfin comes back, announcing cheerfully, the sweet deliveries are done, but then pauses at the sight of His Highness, quickly asking him what is he doing here. But he questions Dorfin and repeats the word Chihiro. Dorfin says yes, she is Chihiro, the daughter of Baron George. Theodore corrects him. The girl he is calling Lady Chihiro, that's not who she is. That's Fatima. That's what Cyril and the others called him. His words land like a blade. Something in her body responds before her mind can catch up. Her breathing goes short. Her legs threaten to give out. Dorfin is at her side in an instant, she barely gets the words out, she just wants to go home, before Dorfin carries her off across the courtyard after a rushed apology to the prince. Theodore is left behind on the stones, staring after her, her old name still on his lips. At the manor, Dorfin relays what happened to Baron George and those assembled inside. Lady Chihiro had a chance encounter with Prince Theodore, and she collapsed. The Baron listens with visible shock. Chihiro, collapsed. She manages to get the words out between labored breaths, she hates the castle. She never wants to go back. The Baron's voice is firm but gentle as he tells her she doesn't have to. He just needs her to rest. Then the air in the room shifts. Baron George's eyes harden. Even though they promised no royalty aside from the king's brother. He was a fool to place any faith in the royal family. He holds the king's favor, yes, but this is a separate matter entirely. Whatever arrangement had been in place, it ends now. His voice drops, quiet and final. The only thing that matters is protecting Chihiro. The news travels fast. By the time it reaches the castle kitchens, the blow lands with full force. Baron George has tendered his resignation as head chef. The kitchen staff erupts in disbelief. He is irreplaceable. He is the finest chef the castle has ever had. Why would he do this? Why now? Mr. Drago himself steps forward and explains without sentiment, the royal family broke their word, and Chihiro is bedridden again because of it. He will leave the castle and take his daughter somewhere they can live quietly. He is sorry to burden everyone, but he will not stay. The kitchen falls into stunned silence. One of the younger chefs, sharp-eyed, spike-haired, someone who has clearly been paying attention, clenches his jaw. Just when she was finally getting better, he mutters. What is the royal family thinking? On the other side of the castle, Rama receives the news in his study room. Baron George has resigned and has requested that a replacement be found or appointed. Remmer goes very still. He can't make sense of it. He knew Baron George, there is no reason he can think of that would drive the man to such an extreme measure. He orders the matter put on hold. He needs to hear from the Baron directly, but before he can go to the Baron, Theodore comes sprinting around a corner of the castle grounds, breathless and wide-eyed. He urgently tells him Fatima was right here. She was actually here, standing right in front of him, and now she's gone again. The attendant accompanying him tries to smooth things over, explaining to Remmer that this is simply the prince's imaginary friend, but he pushes back that she is not imaginary. He shared toys with Fatima, played games with her, missing her terribly when she disappeared. And then he adds the detail that makes Remmer's pulse quicken. Theodore describes Fatima in specific terms, a girl with soft, pale blonde hair and a face that looked just like his own. Now that he thinks about it, Prince Theodore had very light blonde hair when he was born. Almost pale. His eyes, too, had been light so much so that many had hoped they would eventually take on that rare golden gleam. But they never did. His hair darkened over time into a deeper blonde, and his eyes settled into a reddish brown. Back then, he had looked strikingly similar to Chihiro. The same pale hair. The same delicate features. Almost like her. A thought clicks into place. He turns abruptly to the maid. When did his friend disappear? The maid answers softly, about half a year ago, he said. His eyes widened. Half a year. The exact same time frame. The moment she was found. So she was really brought up inside the castle. He never thought he would find a clue here. He quickly demands an audience with His Majesty the King at once. Later, the prince sits beside his mother, both of them facing the king. And insists it is true he always used to play with Fatima. The king says, so there truly was an unknown royal child within the castle. Remer says it seems it was called Fatima by the maid Cyril. Cyril returned to her hometown half a year ago and has disappeared. The timing varies, but among maids and ladies in waiting, many cannot be reached after they leave the castle. With the doubts regarding the matter, he looked into it earlier, but surprisingly, there are also a doctor and knights who completely went missing, and all of them, every single one of them, served consort Havlash. The consort looks surprised and murmurs how frightening. The prince smiles and tells her, most of them entered the castle with her at the time of her wedding. What might that mean? She admits she has no idea. Does he mean the servants her father sent along with her? Now that she thinks of it, she hasn't seen them around. The prince watches her sharply. She is such an unparalleled beauty, and she answers everything vaguely. She hasn't answered a single question clearly. She cares for nothing but her own child. She just sits around. She was chosen as the second royal consort because of the golden gleam in her hair, the daughter of a far-off count. The prince then admits, of course, he also asked her father about them. He answered that they were verified people and he had no idea. The king stops him at once, telling him the Ansbach family is loyal, who have served the royal family generation after generation. Theodore tells his mother brightly that he finally found Fatima, she was really there. Havlash asks did the girl seem well. Theodore's face falls a little. She seemed a bit sad, he admits. He adds with a child's unwavering certainty that he'll see her again, because he misses her. His mother offers a vague response, they'll see. Just then a reporter walks in and announces they searched for everyone who had gone missing. Of all those they looked for, only one person was successfully found, a wet nurse named Ms. Shawn. Remer straightens immediately. He turns and calls out to the woman being brought forward. There you are, he says, and his voice has the sharp edge of someone who has been looking for exactly this person. He has questions. One in particular. Does she know anything about the infant who was once called Fatima? The wet nurse immediately falls to her knees and asks for forgiveness. They took her child hostage to keep her silent about Lady Fatima. She begs for their mercy. Remer stands very still as he processes this. He tells her, with careful steadiness, that there is no need to tremble any further. If she speaks clearly and tells them everything, her safety will be guaranteed. Take your time, he says. And then he asks the question, who is Fatima? Ms. Shawn draws a slow breath and begins. She had been brought on as a wet nurse and was present at the time of consort Havlash's labor, or rather, she was told to wait in a separate room while the birth took place. She heard crying. She was told the second prince had been born. But then she heard a second set of cries. And that was when she was brought in and given two infants to care for, both Prince Theodore and the infant who would be called Lady Fatima. From that moment forward, she always knew, deep in her heart, what the truth was. She admits she had slightly lighter hair and a face just like Theodore. Even so, she was told to raise her in secret. She was so scared. She was given a room within the castle. She lived there with her son. If she ever disobeyed, they threatened her, saying her son would be killed. She starts sobbing again. The prince tells her it's okay, she had no choice. Ms. Shawn continues. Despite her fear, she was ordered to raise the girl in complete secrecy, in a room deep within the castle where no one would see her. She, Cyril, and Cyril's companions were the only people who ever cared for Lady Fatima. Cyril would occasionally swap the two infants, because until they were about a year old, they looked nearly identical, and during those brief windows, Lady Fatima was allowed outside. Those were the only moments she and Prince Theodore could ever meet each other, she says. And then the children began to look less alike as they approached 2 years old, and even those small freedoms disappeared. Cyril stopped taking Lady Fatima out. Lady Fatima sat alone, staring blankly, unable to walk yet. She was deeply worried about the child's unusual state. And then one day, without warning, Cyril took Lady Fatima and vanished. By the time she realized all of Cyril's companions had disappeared as well, she fled the castle in terror, taking her own son with her. The room is heavy with silence when she finishes. The king realizes there were plots operating deep within the castle walls, the orchestrator and motive are still unclear, the investigation must continue. Then the question that has been hovering over everything finally gets spoken aloud. Does this mean that Chihiro is his child? Ms. Shawn bows her head and admits she believes so. And Theodore, who has been listening, wide-eyed, lights up with pure, unfiltered joy. He asks, voice sparkling, whether this means Fatima is his sister. The king, visibly shaken, turns to consort Havilish, who sits across the room quietly. He asks her directly, did she give birth to twins? She tilts her head, touching her finger gently to her lips. She doesn't know, she says softly. She can't remember. Remer's jaw tightens. He cuts in with sharp precision, surely any woman would remember how many children she had given birth to. He rephrases, does she remember Theodore's birth? She holds his gaze, expression unreadable, and tells him she has no recollection of that either. Kygris presses on, asking Ms. Shawn if she remembers consort's Havilish condition at the time. She replies no, she was in a separate room. He then asks her, then there was also a doctor who attended the birth. Does she know anything about his whereabouts? She replies, more or less, Cyril mentioned there was a room where prisoners used to be shut in. There was a pit used for throwing bodies into, so probably he was killed. The prince thinks several of the men he dispatched around consort Havilish also disappeared, but was that why? The king then tells his brother that is enough. There's no point in questioning Havilish further. He looks like he wants to argue, but holds himself back. Of course, he would gather proof. He then says they should return to the matter at hand. If that Fatma really is Chihiro, that would make her the 9th princess. But then, the wet nurse cuts in, confessing Lady Fatma was born before the 8th princess, Lady Miltesia, while Her Majesty the Queen went into labor first, consort Havilish's daughter was faster. The prince freezes in shock. It means Fatima is the 8th princess. The familiar manner appears, Chihiro steps through a doorway in her nightgown, looking pale. Baron George startles when he sees her. He sweeps her up immediately, asking if she's all right, telling her not to push herself. She hugs him back with surprising warmth and insists she's fine. This is the second time she has gotten sick because of her true family, so she is kind of used to it, but she doesn't want to be. A quick recovery would surely make Fatima happy as well. She refuses to lose. She will live and will find more happiness. She will stand up as many times as it takes. The investigation presses forward, relentlessly. A report comes in from the soldiers sent to search the castle's lower depths. They found the pit that Ms. Shawn had described, a dark shaft bored deep into the earth. But the lower reaches are filled with gas, making it impossible to descend or even to hold a light near the opening. They found nothing. Whatever, or whoever, was thrown down there is beyond reach for now. Remer acknowledges the report quietly. Understood. He then thinks, so Chihiro is his niece, it is obvious, so she was a human rather than an angel after all. Chihiro said she couldn't remember the time before she was abandoned, is that true? But she understands so much, does she not? Then why did she stay quiet about it? Later, he sits before Baron George and realizes he seems to be in an unusually bad mood. Renner comes straight to the point. He tells Baron that his resignation as head chef will not be accepted. The Baron's jaw drops. What does he mean? He explains that because he is also her godfather, he cannot permit him to take her to live beyond the castle, and he understands the reason, doesn't he? Chihiro tenses. What are they talking about? Quitting as head chef? Is Dad leaving the castle because she was bedridden again? He wouldn't permit it because he is her parent. He didn't apologize for the no contact with royals being broken, so does he not know she and Theodore met, and did he not find out she is the 8th princess? She then quietly asks, does he know who she is? The prince freezes, clearly caught off guard by the sudden question. Then, quietly, deliberately, he answers, she is Prince Theodore's twin Fatima. The word lands strangely. Chihiro, seated, goes very still. Her thoughts begin moving fast. Would it be safer to give a vague answer and watch his reaction? There is one thing she has been careful about since arriving in this world. It is not to speak of things that would endanger her safety. She doesn't know what could be a danger to her, so that is why she doesn't talk much about her past in particular. That is for her sake and to keep those around her from getting wrapped up in it as well. She softly says she doesn't care about the past anymore. She is a princess who was thrown away by the royal family and she wants them to leave her alone. She is tired of talking about this. She wants to end this already. The prince looks shocked and then says she thinks she is abandoned by the royal family. That is preposterous. Her eyes widen. And then the scenes start replaying in her mind as well. She goes very still. She fights against the rising tide of Fatma's sadness threatening to overtake her. But it erupts anyway. Is she preposterous? She screams back, voice cracking with fury. She is the one who was actually thrown away. She struggled on the brink of death in a filthy room with no food or water. The royal family murdered her. She then starts crying for herself. Why wouldn't anyone save her? She was so alone and then she died. Her body shakes violently as an anxiety attack takes hold. Her father is there in an instant, lifting her into his arms, holding her as she trembles. He glares at the prince. All the royal family has done is make his daughter cry. Now they can leave them alone. With that, he slams the door. Silence falls. The prince remains seated, quietly, sorrow etching his face. He is then escorted out by the butler and Sasha and lets them know that he will call again, but they both glare at him. The prince thinks she is certainly loved compared to the royal family that wants to be concerned with her because of the golden gleam or the golden monarch. He thinks it is his brother's loss. Whatever happens in the palace, the king bears responsibility, and not knowing is no excuse. Chihiro has every right to be angry. She has always been pulled into things by no fault of her own. He wishes he could leave her alone. But he cannot. Because she is royalty. Because of the golden monarch. Why did it have to be her? Back inside the manor, Chihiro clings to her dad. She calls to him. Can she tell him something? He says, of course. She can tell him anything. So she does. Everything, except reincarnating. She tells him about Fatima's memories. About being raised in love, then suddenly abandoned. About the king and consort being her biological parents, and being the 8th princess, as Cyril once told her. About Adu, the one who saved her. About how she was left alone near death, and then was found. Baron George listens to all of it. When she finishes, his eyes are soft and full. He tells her that it must have been terrible. That she did well. That he is proud. But then he speaks softly, his voice low, almost a whisper. God surely sent her to be with him. That is why she had to go through such awful stuff, and he's sorry for that. She blinks up at him. God sent her to Dad. Now that she thinks about it, it is true. If she had not been abandoned, she would have never become Dad's daughter. It is because of that that she is here now. When she thinks of that, even those painful memories seem to soften. She starts sobbing again and hugs him tightly. She pulls back when her father says, though there's already an 8th princess. He doesn't know why she would think she's the 8th princess. She looks sort of dumbfounded. Now she realizes that she ended up driving the prince away without hearing him out. Suddenly she calls out to the butler and tells him to send the message to the castle asking them if the king's brother will meet. Her father stiffens in surprise, looking at her eyes. They have turned completely gold. She stands tall, unwavering. No hesitation. No fear. She will face them, hers and Fatima's, memories and destiny. And that concludes today's video. Happy Easter to everyone celebrating, and make sure to stay safe. And most importantly, thank you God for another beautiful day.